Jon Snow's first recollection of Dragon Flame was a distant one, little more than myth and rumor in the icy halls of Winterfell. But what a strange twist of fate it was that those distant whispers should become his reality. There, in the courtyard where he once stood as a bastard boy, he now towered on the neck of a living legend. It began the day he learned the truth of his heritage. That he was not merely Eddard Stark's son of uncertain birth, but rather the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, his existence woven of ice and fire. The Targaryen blood he had once regarded as an inconvenient rumor now manifested in a way no one could deny. The dragons sensed him. Even the largest of them, Drogon, the monstrous black drake with wings like midnight sails, allowed Jon near. At first, it was small moments, Drogon letting him stand closer than any man might dare. Then Rhaegal, named for Jon's own father, would nudge him with a gentler curiosity. Even Viserion, who had once been the smallest and often overlooked, gazed at Jon with an almost longing recognition. Yet, no one truly believed Jon might ride all three. Daenerys Targaryen, his queen, his aunt, though that knowledge rested between them like a tense secret, commanded the largest share of their attention. She had tamed Drogon, forging a bond that few could comprehend. How then could Jon manage to replicate that feat? It was an improbable notion, though rumor had begun to spread among the Unsullied and Dothraki that the dragons heeded him, too. He did not ask for their reverence. He had never wished to supplant Daenerys, never asked to be hailed as the male Targaryen. Nor did he covet the Iron Throne. But the long war with the dead had ended in the victory of the living, and the North was safe for now. Daenerys' ambition to take King's Landing had reignited, and this time she was more determined than ever. Jon traveled south with her, burdened by the uneasy guilt that perhaps, if it came to it, he would have to confront her. For the good of the realm, if her desire for the throne turned into cruelty. Yet he hoped such a confrontation would never become necessary. Strange, too, were the tidings carried by ravens. Pockets of Lannister loyalists still clung to the Red Keep, fighting under the Golden Lion banner, but it was said that they were uncertain after the downfall of Cersei. King's Landing was not governed by a single iron hand. Rather, chaos reigned in the streets. Hunger, desperation, and the smell of old smoke from the last siege stifled the air. Tyrion Lannister, weary and uncertain, spoke of clandestine supporters who might rally to Daenerys' claim if given a demonstration of power. Sometimes fear is the only coin that spends, the imp said to Jon one morning, but Jon felt a chill at those words. He had seen enough fear, enough violence. He wanted peace, or at the least, mercy. The moment everything changed was a day not unlike any other on the road to King's Landing. The dragon soared above, Daenerys astride Drogon, while Jon rode a horse through the ranks of the Unsullied and the Dothraki screamers. The quiet words of prayer to the old gods or the seven drifted among soldiers who anticipated death, destruction, or triumph. The ground shook beneath the thunder of hooves. On the horizon rose the once proud walls of King's Landing. The sun glinted off turrets and spires like a crown of tarnished gold. Daenerys dismounted Drogon once they were near the safe perimeter from the city's scorpions, those fearsome ballistae meant to pierce dragahide. Jon approached Rhaegal, who waited behind the lines in a protective formation with Grey Worm and the Unsullied. The dragon gave a low rumbling noise of recognition. He had always been more docile around Jon than Drogon was, and sometimes Jon wondered if Rhaegal sensed that he bore the name of Jon's father. The bond they shared was something half mystic, half blood. When Jon tentatively moved closer to Mount Rhaegal as he had done once before in the north, he felt a deep trembling within himself. He recalled the dizzying freedom of that first flight. He also recalled Daenerys' watchful gaze. She did not like to see another Targaryen on dragonback, perhaps fearful that it foreshadowed a challenge to her sovereignty. Even so, she had let him. Was it trust or necessity? He could not be sure. Rhaegal, Jon murmured, stepping forward. The dragon bowed its colossal head, letting Jon wrap a hand around one of the spines near its neck. Scaling its side, he felt the wind swirl about them both. Soldiers watched in awe, swords forgotten at their hips. Jon settled astride the beast, scanning the distance for Daenerys, but found her gaze fixed on him with something that might have been pride or envy. Grey Worm stood near the vanguard. Tyrion, astride a small horse behind the lines, looked on with hands folded in tense contemplation. Then came the moment none expected. Viserion, pale and sleek, soared overhead, circling in the sky with a restless pitch to its cry. It dipped low, and Jon felt Rhaegal quake as though sensing its sibling's call. Daenerys' voice rose sharp and commanding, an echo across the field. Viserion, to me. But the pale dragon did not obey her. Instead, its golden eyes settled on Jon, and it let out a cry that rattled the very bones of every soldier within earshot. Rhaegal roared back. Drogon flapped his massive wings behind Daenerys, releasing a torrent of flame into the air, a hot wind that singed the grass. Soldiers stepped back in fear. For a moment, Jon thought this was the hour of their ruin, the dragons turning on each other. Perhaps Viserion blamed Jon for usurping the place next to Daenerys. Or maybe the jealousy brewed among them as the beasts recognized both riders as Targaryen royalty. But to Jon's astonishment, Viserion landed with a crash of talons into the earth not far from him. Its head swung in a slow arc, the long neck glittering like porcelain, then it snorted. Jon felt a pull like a silent invitation. He recalled only seeing Daenerys fly on Drogon. The mere idea of a single rider commanding 2 dragons at once was unimaginable. But here was something else at play, a call in the blood. He glanced at Daenerys again, but she was looking at him with wide, incredulous eyes. She made no attempt to stop him. In a swirl of momentum, Jon slid from Rhaegal's back and placed a tentative hand on Viserion's pale hide. Rhaegal watched but did not interfere, as though a silent accord existed among them. Viserion's hide was hot to the touch and shimmering with power, yet it did not snap or shy away. In that moment, Jon sensed that Viserion was inviting him to ride if he dared. Terror and wonder warred inside him. Could one man truly ride multiple dragons, if not simultaneously, at least in turn? Dragons were proud, fierce creatures that rarely accepted more than one bond. Here, however, was a cosmic anomaly, Targaryen blood from both father and mother, the unification of ice and fire. Perhaps that was enough. He swung himself onto Viserion's back with the same practiced caution he had used on Rhaegal. The beast let out a long hiss, but it did not unseat him. Shock rippled among the troops. Daenerys herself wore an expression that was a mix of horror, awe, and a hint of betrayal. Drogon roared, wings beating furiously, yet he did not swoop down. Instead, he soared overhead like a watchful sentinel, keeping an eye on Jon and the other 2 dragons. After a brief moment to adjust, Jon felt Viserion shift beneath him, coiling its muscles as though preparing to leap. He gripped a bony ridge, bracing himself. The next instant, the wind screamed by his ears. Viserion took flight with a thunderous whoosh of wings, lifting Jon into the sky. Rhaegal followed suit, flanking them, roaring in exultation. Below, men shouted and pointed, 1,000 heads craning to witness what should have been impossible, one rider commanding 2 dragons. And though Jon could only see Daenerys in a distant blur, he thought he recognized heartbreak on her face, or perhaps a sense of losing something dear and exclusive to her. Yet she mounted Drogon and rose to meet them in the air, determined not to be left behind or overshadowed. High above the plains before King's Landing, the 3 dragons roamed the sky in a synchronized dance, their roars echoing across the horizon. Tyrion found himself at a loss for words, and Grey Worm could only watch with a soldier's stoicism. The combined might of 3 dragons in flight, with both Daenerys and Jon as riders, was greater than anything the 7 kingdoms had seen in centuries. No horns were sounded in that moment, but had there been, it would have been the clarion call of prophecy. For Jon Snow, a man once called a bastard, was no longer hidden in the shadows of his own bloodline. He was Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the throne, and the dragons themselves acknowledged him. Their flight was brief, a demonstration of extraordinary power, before they landed again. Dust and wind whipped across the encampment. The soldiers of the North and the Unsullied were torn between cheering and recoiling in shock. Jon dismounted, breathing hard, hair whipped every which way. His eyes darted to Daenerys, who slid from Drogon's back in a swirl of silver blonde hair and black leathers. She approached him. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet tension between them was as sharp as a naked blade. "They have accepted you," Daenerys finally said. Her voice trembled with an emotion that might have been sorrow or fury or both. "All 3. "I didn't plan for this," Jon replied. His voice was rough with apology. "They chose me as they chose you." Tyrion, ever the opportunist, wove his way forward, placing himself within earshot. "This changes things," he said, eyes glinting with pragmatic cunning. "It could be a sign to the people of King's Landing that House Targaryen's rule is not in question. Or it could cause confusion. We must tread carefully." Daenerys said nothing for a moment, only exhaled shakily. Jon recognized in her expression the fear that her destiny, the singular destiny she had carried across the narrow sea, might no longer be hers alone. He reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We share this. The realm needs both of us." She let him keep his hand there. Slowly, she nodded, though her purple eyes blazed with an inner conflict. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. "For the realm." From that day forward, the notion of Jon Snow commanding all 3 dragons became the whispered talk of the camp. Some saw him as a challenger, others as an equal partner to the Dragon Queen. But the march went on, unstoppable as the tides. The army set camp within a few leagues of King's Landing, preparing for a final confrontation. Daenerys wanted to keep the city mostly intact, to lay claim to it as a merciful queen. But tension simmered. Rumors circulated that pockets of the Golden Company remained inside the city walls, loyalist sellswords and Lannister men who still believed in the old regime. Their presence threatened a potential bloodbath. Jon found he could not sleep well in the nights leading up to the battle. Instead, he often rose early, going to check on the dragons. Each morning, Rhaegal would be dozing or preening, Viserion curled near a massive cooking pit as if lured by the warmth of the coals. Drogon claimed a hillside vantage, overlooking the city with an imperious scowl, primal and vigilant. Jon could sense their moods now in a vague yet persistent way, as though an invisible string tied them to him. Sometimes he thought he could feel their hunger, their restlessness, even their affection. He did not speak of this to Daenerys, worried it might deepen her fears that the beasts preferred him over her. So he kept his knowledge private, uncertain what to do with it. The night before the planned assault, a new plan formed among the War Council. Tyrion argued that a direct strike with all 3 dragons might minimize the bloodshed of a ground assault. Let the city see 3 dragons in the sky, and intimidation alone might open the gates. Grey Worm and the Unsullied could follow, subduing any who resisted without unnecessary slaughter. Daenerys nodded in agreement, seeing a chance to prove her might while also preventing a protracted siege. Jon, however, felt an undercurrent of dread. He remembered well how even a single dragon's presence could inspire fear and, sometimes, push men to do rash things. Would 3 dragons overhead drive the city into panic, rather than surrender? Or would it grant them a swift capitulation that saved lives? The question haunted him. He wanted no part in the needless destruction of King's Landing. He had seen what had happened at the sack of King's Landing long ago, retold in stories. He did not want history to repeat itself. Nevertheless, the plan was set. At dawn, the 3 dragons would lift from their hilltop roost, Daenerys and Jon leading the aerial approach, while Tyrion rode ahead with a small vanguard to treat with any inside the walls who might be amenable to peace. Grey Worm's legions would wait behind, ready to march at a moment's notice. The king in the north, though he had surrendered that title to unite behind Daenerys, still commanded a sense of loyalty among the northern bannermen, many of whom would not fight without his orders. Thus, the delicate coalition formed. Dawn came, the sun red as blood on the horizon. The air tasted of salt from Blackwater Bay. From atop a ridge, Jon beheld the city's walls, half rebuilt since the last siege, with damaged towers rising like wounded sentinels. King's Landing was no longer the shining city it had been under the early Targaryen kings. War and famine had left it scarred and suspicious. Flea Bottom, the warren of the poor, teemed with beggars and thieves who eyed the outskirts fearfully. With heart pounding, Jon mounted Rhaegal. He glanced once at Viserion, who regarded him with golden eyes, but he could not possibly ride both at once. It seemed that the 3 dragons had come to some unspoken understanding. Jon could command them all, but practically he must choose one at a time. Viserion would follow his words if needed. He had tested the bond the previous evening, calling Viserion to land in front of startled soldiers. It had obeyed. For now, though, the pale dragon remained on the ground, waiting for a command. Daenerys climbed Drogon's great flank, the beast's obsidian scales rippling in the sunrise. When they took flight, it was like thunder unbound. Wings carved the early morning sky, and the city below stirred in alarm. Bells rang from the watchtowers, men shouted, and horns sounded. From his vantage point, Jon saw shapes scrambling along the parapets, soldiers aiming scorpions or bows. He prayed the city would see reason, that the presence of not 1 but 3 dragons would stifle any desire to resist. They circled above the tall gates. Tyrion, with a small retinue, approached on horseback, the Lannister sigil discreetly absent from his attire. He carried only a white flag. The city guard had formed ranks before the gate, halberds bristling. For a tense span, the watchers on the walls craned their necks up, transfixed by the swirling silhouettes of dragons overhead. Drogon's roar rattled the masonry. Rhaegal spat a small jet of flame into the air, a cautionary warning. Then, from somewhere near the base of the gate, Tyrion's voice rose, magnified by the hush of men too frightened to speak. He called for parley, demanded an audience. Within minutes, a figure wearing half-battered gold armor emerged onto the battlements. The new commander of the city guard, or perhaps a lesser noble, shouted down that they would treat with him, but only if the dragons did not strike. Tyrion assured them. But tension rippled through the crowd of onlookers along the city wall. After a short, frantic conversation, the man signaled for the gates to open just enough to allow Tyrion and a few men inside. Jon's heart hammered with every second. War hovered in the air like a blade's edge. One misstep and they would all plunge into a nightmare of fire and death. Time stretched. The dragons circled, banking wide arcs. The scorpions on the walls stayed trained upon them, but no bolts were fired. Daenerys' posture was rigid with readiness. She wore a fierce expression, a queen determined to claim what she believed was hers. Jon struggled with conflicting emotions, loyalty to Daenerys, fear of what might happen if the city resisted, dread of unleashing dragon fire upon innocents. He prayed this show of force would suffice. At length, the gates opened fully. A ripple of movement emerged from within, and Jon spotted Tyrion riding out. Next to him was a cluster of city guards. One carried a tattered white banner. Another, the commander, stood with a trembling sword in hand, which he then drove tip-first into the dirt at Tyrion's prompting, a sign of surrender. Daenerys angled Drogon to descend, and Jon followed with Rhaegal. The impact of landing shook the earth. Viserion swooped in a moment later, landing behind them, creating a monstrous triad of living fire. Soldiers on the walls trembled. The gates stood wide open. Tyrion dismounted. He met Daenerys with a cautious yet relieved smile. "They will open the city," he said. "They have no wish to burn. The small folk suffer enough. They will let you in." Daenerys exhaled, relief and triumph mingling in her eyes. Jon noticed a flicker of pride in her expression. For once, no siege, no bloodbath. A mild victory for mercy. He slid off Rhaegal, and the dragon hissed in readiness, scanning for threats. The city guards parted to let the queen approach. A hush fell over them as Daenerys Targaryen entered, flanked by Tyrion and Grey Worm and the ranks of Unsullied soon to follow. The populace that peered from windows and alleyways looked on in a mixture of dread and wonder at the sight of the three dragons. Jon walked at Daenerys' side, Rhaegal and Viserion trailing behind on foot as if they were monstrous hounds. Drogon, more temperamental, kept a short aerial vantage, gliding overhead in lazy loops. The streets, battered and dusty, carried the scars of previous battles. Daenerys' expression became grave as she witnessed the condition of what would be her seat of power. She had dreamed of returning her family's dynasty to the capital, but the reality was bleak. They proceeded deeper into the city, heading toward the Red Keep. Clusters of city guards surrendered on sight, dropping weapons and bowing or kneeling. No one dared test the dragons. Jon could sense the mounting tension behind Daenerys' eyes. She wanted to seize the moment, claim her birthright, and reassure the frightened people that she was not the tyrant rumor might have made her out to be. The gates of the Red Keep were found unbarred, the defenders having fled or hidden. The queen and her retinue passed within, and at last they stood in the expansive courtyard that led to the throne room. No small measure of debris was scattered about. Broken columns, overturned carts, and scorch marks from prior battles. Jon felt a strange sense of déjà vu. He remembered the stories told by Ser Davos and others of how Stannis had once marched these halls, how Cersei had prowled them like a cornered lioness. Now it was Daenerys and Jon who stood in the heart of it all. Grey Worm barked orders, sending the Unsullied to secure vantage points and check for traps or hidden pockets of resistance. Tyrion paced with an uneasy look, as if every stone in the Red Keep was steeped in betrayal and ghosts. Daenerys gazed upward at Drogon, who hovered with a slow, menacing beat of wings. Then she turned to Jon. "Come with me. We will claim the throne. Together, show them the realm has two Targaryens to protect it." Jon hesitated. He recalled the vow he had made he would support her claim. But how would the people react if he stood beside her as an equal? He could not deny the hush that fell among the Unsullied and northern men whenever he was near the dragons. The sense that he too was a rightful heir, perhaps even more rightful. The knowledge unsettled him. Yet he nodded, following her inside the throne room. The sight was both grand and tragic. Sunlight poured through shattered windows and broken roof sections, illuminating the Iron Throne at the far end, a twisted mass of swords hammered and melted into a seat. It seemed to mock them with its battered presence. Daenerys walked slowly, steps echoing. In the corners stood a few servants who had hidden themselves, now emerging uncertainly. Tyrion hung back near the entrance, discreetly watching. Jon stayed by Daenerys' side until they reached the dais where the Iron Throne stood. Daenerys placed a hand upon the throne's cold metal. Jon studied her face, recalling the many stories she had told him of her years in exile, how she had wandered Essos, endured countless trials to reach this moment. The queen swallowed, then slowly turned to Jon. "Have I earned this?" she asked softly, voice echoing in the empty chamber. There was a vulnerability in her eyes. Jon thought of her dragons, her unswerving quest, her liberation of slaves in Essos, her alliance with him against the Night King. He also thought of the cost, the battles waged, the moral compromises. "Yes," he murmured. "You have fought for it, suffered for it. I believe you want a better world." A quiet tear glimmered on her cheek, but her posture straightened and she seated herself upon the Iron Throne. There was no roar of applause, no joyous crowd to witness the triumph. Yet in that solemn emptiness, a powerful hush spoke volumes. A Targaryen sat the throne once more. Jon backed a step, feeling the weight of the moment. Then, echoing across the stone walls, a roar from outside tore through the hush. It was Drogon, enraged or alarmed. In the next instant, one of the Unsullied rushed inside. "Your Grace," he exclaimed. "They attack. Scorpion bolts from the walls." Daenerys rose at once, wide-eyed. "But they surrendered." Tyrion's face grew pale. A faction must still be resisting. Perhaps the Golden Company or Lannister loyalists. They must have hidden themselves in the city. Jon's thoughts leapt to the dragons, Drogon in the sky, Rhaegal and Viserion in the courtyard. If Scorpion crews had reassembled hidden ballistae among the rubble, the dragons could be in danger. Without waiting for Daenerys' order, Jon sprinted toward the exit. Tyrion called after him and Daenerys swiftly followed, her face a mask of wrath and fear. In the courtyard, Jon found chaos. Rhaegal was clawing the ground in agony, a large ballista bolt embedded in its side. Blood, dark and smoking, oozed from the wound. Viserion roared in shared fury, launching a torrent of flame at a battlement where the hidden Scorpion crew operated. Screams erupted as the stone caught fire and men tumbled. Drogon swooped overhead, blasting a separate tower where more archers lurked. Jon raced to Rhaegal's side, ignoring the heat and the swirling dust. The dragon recognized him, letting out a pitiful moan. Jon's heart twisted at the sight of the wound. Lannister or Golden Company soldiers must have harbored the weapon within the keep's perimeter. The courtyard was alight with flame and confusion. Grey Worm and the Unsullied scrambled to subdue the hidden insurgents, but more arrows and bolts rained down from upper windows. Daenerys emerged, eyes blazing with Targaryen fury. She gestured Drogon, who roared overhead, to unleash another wave of flame upon the source of the arrows. Stone and flesh alike were consumed. Jon cringed at the carnage. Innocent servants and peasants might also be caught in the conflagration. With a desperate yank, Jon tried to pull the bolt free from Rhaegal's side. Blood poured over his hands, sizzling against the dragon's fiery hide. Viserion landed nearby, protective, snapping at any soldier who dared approach. Daenerys rushed up and grabbed the bolt as well, lending her strength. Together, they heaved. With a wet, tearing sound, the metal shaft dislodged, and Rhaegal shrieked in pain. Immediately, the dragon flailed, nearly striking Jon and Daenerys. But they kept hold, trying to comfort the wounded beast. Drogon continued scorching the ramparts, forcing the ambushes to retreat or perish. Grey Worm directed the Unsullied with lethal precision, clearing the courtyard building by building. Arrows pinged off shields. Tyrion ducked behind a fallen column, shouting directions to help identify any civilians who needed protection. Jon covered Daenerys as she stood near Rhaegal, pressing her palm flat against the dragon's neck, whispering calming words in High Valyrian. Its breathing was ragged, but it seemed it might live. Then from a second-story window in a battered tower, a final Scorpion bolt was loosed. Jon caught sight of it too late, he had time only to shout. The bolt whistled through the air. Viserion roared, leaping in front of Rhaegal as if sensing the attack and seeking to shield its sibling. The bolt struck Viserion's flank with a sickening crunch, lodging deep. The pale dragon howled, thrashing violently, wings scraping the courtyard walls. Jon cursed, ignoring the swirl of dust to rush for the second ballista operator. Daenerys looked on in horror, torn between two wounded dragons. Grey Worm and the Unsullied stormed the tower, skewering the Scorpion crew. The final shots fell silent. The courtyard reeked of smoke, blood, and the acrid stench of burned flesh. Rhaegal lay panting, bleeding. Viserion shuddered, pinned by the bolt near its hind leg. Drogon landed atop a collapsed section of wall, tail lashing, still vigilant. Any soldier that remained wise enough threw down their weapons, trembling at the triple threat. Jon fell to his knees beside Viserion. Blood coated the courtyard stones. The dragon's eye rolled, and its breath came in short, labored gasps. Around them, Unsullied formed a protective perimeter, archers scanning for any further threats. The fighting seemed to have died down, but the city was hardly calm. Daenerys joined Jon, tears in her eyes. They attacked after surrendering, she whispered, voice thick with anger. They betrayed their own word. Jon shook his head, pressing a hand to the wound. Likely a rogue faction that refused to yield. The city itself may not be wholly at fault, but Viserion he couldn't finish. He set his jaw, trying to stifle the surge of anguish. Though his bond with the dragons was new and wondrous, in this moment it was painfully real. He felt Viserion's agony as if it were his own. "Help me," Daenerys said, grabbing at the bolt. They pulled together, but this one was lodged deeper in bone. Viserion thrashed, spitting blood-tinged flame. Jon had to dodge to avoid the raging bursts of dragon fire. If they yanked the bolt the wrong way, they risked killing the dragon outright. Tyrion approached carefully. "We must tend to them, both Rhaegal and Viserion. The city is effectively ours, but pockets of resistance remain. We must show a firm hand or we risk more ambushes." Daenerys shot him a furious look. "I will not leave them." Tyrion lifted his hands in conciliation. "I only mean to say we need organization. Let the Unsullied do their work. Secure the keep, gather the people in the square, and quell the rebels. You can remain here with the dragons while I handle the city with Grey Worm. And Jon, if he wishes, can stay to see the dragons through." Jon nodded, brushing sweat from his brow, ignoring the smears of dragon blood. "Yes, handle the city. But Tyrion, no needless killing. The people are frightened enough." Tyrion offered a rueful half-smile. "I've no desire to earn the name Kingslayer, or Queenslayer, or any slayer. We'll do what must be done, no more." As the sun climbed higher, the Queen and Jon devoted themselves to treating the dragon's wounds. Soldiers brought vats of scalding water and bandages from the Red Keep stores. Maesters, or men who claimed some skill in healing, hurried forward with salves and potions. Tending to dragons was a daunting task, for they were not beasts of the common realm. Their blood steamed, their flesh too hot to touch without gloves. Yet through sheer determination and the sense that these creatures were not mere animals but living extensions of House Targaryen's legacy, Daenerys and Jon pressed on. Rhaegal's wound was less severe. The bolt had punctured a patch of tough hide near the rib but not shattered bone. Viserion's was graver. The bolt had lodged deep near a hind leg joint, and the thrashing caused further damage. Carefully, inch by agonizing inch, they worked to remove the projectile. Twice the dragon roared so loudly that the courtyard shook. Flaming spittle shot from its jaws, nearly torching a group of Unsullied who had ventured too close. Jon had to speak in a low, soothing voice he hadn't realized he could muster, a resonance of high Valyrian he scarcely knew he possessed. Daenerys watched, half in relief and half in wonder. Eventually, with a wet, sickening sound, the bolt was freed, and black-red blood poured. Daenerys staunched it with a cloth soaked in a maester's coagulant. By late afternoon, the dragons lay panting and exhausted, but alive. Tyrion returned with updates. The city had been mostly pacified, with the Golden Company's last loyalists either slain or fled. People were terrified of Daenerys and her beasts, but the harsh ambush had melted their will to resist any further. They were war-weary. That evening, after the day's horror and frenzy, Jon made a quiet inspection of King's Landing's outer wards with a handful of northern men. Civilians cowered in shuttered homes or rummaged for scraps amid charred rubble. Many wore fearful expressions. He tried to show them that mercy was possible, distributing some rations from the supply train. The northern men, once suspicious of southerners, softened at the sight of hungry children. The capital was a wounded beast, battered by war and tyranny. If Daenerys truly meant to heal the realm, it would be a monumental task. When Jon returned to the Red Keep, he found Daenerys in the throne room again. This time, torches lit the hall. Grey Worm stood guard, unsmiling, and Tyrion lingered at a respectful distance. Daenerys looked weary, her hair unkempt, her hands stained with dragon blood that had dried in dark streaks. Her eyes flicked to Jon, relief loosening her tense posture. He approached, heart heavy with the weight of all that had transpired. "How are they?" Her voice was soft. Rhaegal rests, breathing easier. Viserion, too. The maesters say the wounds will heal in time, but it will be slow. She looked down, a flash of guilt in her eyes. "You were right about caution. Our presence alone was almost enough to secure peace, but the city wasn't fully united. Now they've paid in blood." Jon gently placed a hand on her shoulder, searching her gaze. "A rogue faction. War seldom ends cleanly. But it could have been worse. They would have unleashed scorpions on us all. The dragons forced their hand, but we overcame it quickly." Her eyes flickered with that old Targaryen fire. "I won't allow them another chance to harm my children. Nor you. The city must learn who rules now." Jon nodded, though he felt a pang of disquiet. Dominance by fear had never sat well with him. But how else to prevent further ambushes? He recognized that this day's events might push Daenerys toward a harsher stance with the populace. He recalled how easily a dragon could decimate a city street. If she grew paranoid or vengeful, that fire might be unleashed. And if he did not support it, conflict between them could arise. But there was no direct threat in her voice now, just exhaustion. He looked toward Tyrion and Grey Worm. What of the city's governance? We can't let the people starve or live in terror. Tyrion spoke up, stepping forward. We'll set up distribution of grains from the royal granaries. Punish those who resist violently, but otherwise let them bend the knee. It's a precarious balance. Too much leniency, and more rebels may arise. Too much severity, and we become the tyrants we once fought against. Daenerys exhaled. Then we must walk that line carefully. The realm will see we're just. But House Targaryen's might shall not be challenged again. Night fell fully over King's Landing. Patrols roamed the streets, searching for straggling rebels. The Red Keep, half in ruins from prior wars, now served as Daenerys' seat. She and Jon dined on simple fare in one of the lesser halls, sharing the meal with Tyrion, Grey Worm, and a few others. Daenerys said little, her mind clearly on her wounded dragons. Jon offered what words of hope he could, but an unspoken tension hovered between them. They had begun this conquest together, yet the day's events highlighted the delicate balance of power. She was queen, determined to assert her rule. He was a Targaryen with a bond to the dragons that both amazed and unsettled her. When the meal was done, Tyrion tactfully excused himself. Grey Worm left to inspect the night watch. Jon lingered, the two Targaryens regarding each other in the torchlight. You should sleep, Jon suggested softly. So should you, she replied. You've not rested since we arrived. He offered a tired half-smile. I'll sleep once I'm sure the city is quiet. She stood, crossing the few feet between them. Hesitantly, she brushed a hand against his cheek, as if reaffirming the bond they shared. In that moment, all her regality faded, leaving behind a woman who had lost so much and carried the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders. Thank you, Jon, she murmured, for standing by me, for your mercy, for helping my children. He touched her hand gently. We stand together. That's the only way this realm survives. She searched his eyes, then leaned in, placing a soft kiss on his forehead, a simple token of affection and gratitude. Then she slipped away, leaving him alone with the echoes in the dim hall. Sleep found Jon eventually, but in fitful fragments. When dawn came, he rose and went to check on the dragons. Rhaegal slept heavily, bandaged and healing. Viserion whimpered occasionally, but seemed stable. Drogon lurked watchfully, occasionally snarling at approaching guards. Jon found himself able to soothe Drogon somewhat, speaking low in Valyrian. The big black dragon allowed him near, though not as close as Daenerys. He took it as a tentative acceptance of his role. The next few days were a blur of reconstruction, negotiation, and the stamping out of sporadic violence. Tyrion worked tirelessly, coordinating with local lords who bent the knee. Grey Worm secured the city with the Unsullied and allowed the northern men to return home if they wished. Most, however, lingered for a time out of loyalty to Jon. Daenerys divided her attention between the city's needs and her dragons, ensuring that Rhaegal and Viserion received what care the maesters could provide. A new cautious routine emerged. Every so often, Daenerys or Jon would ride Drogon or Rhaegal above the city in a display of watchful power, reminding the populace that House Targaryen now presided. A fraction of the people, hearing rumors of multiple Targaryen dragon riders, whispered that this was a second coming of the conquerors Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters. But the city soon realized that these were different times. The queen tried to show mercy, establishing breadlines, punishing only those who rose in arms. Jon mingled with small folk, listening to their grievances and quietly aiding them. Word spread across the Seven Kingdoms. King's Landing had fallen to Daenerys Targaryen, and Jon Snow, the secret Targaryen, rode with her. With all three dragons at their call, only the blind or the foolish dared resist. Lords of the Stormlands and the Reach bowed in submission, sending envoys with gifts or pleas for peace. The Vale, guided by Sansa's diplomatic council in the north, remained cautious but recognized the new regime. The realm was war-weary, grateful that the conquest had not turned into a slaughter. Still, not all hearts were won. Some resented Jon's Targaryen blood. Others believed Daenerys was too foreign, too strong, or too radical. Jon often found himself in heated discussions with Tyrion about how to quell such dissent without turning to cruelty. Daenerys, for her part, wrestled with the ghosts of her past. She still remembered the treachery of the slavers in Essos, the betrayal of those who pretended loyalty only to strike when her guard was down. The Scorpion ambush had heightened her suspicions. Yet for the realm to be stable, she needed unity, not just fear. Weeks passed and the dragons mended. Rhaegal recovered enough to fly short distances. Viserion was slower to heal, but day by day the pale dragon improved, hobbling around the courtyard with determined huffs, devouring goats and sheep provided by the local shepherds, not always willingly but compensated by the crown. Drogon grew protective of his siblings, occasionally brushing his snout against Viserion's flank to comfort it. Sometimes Jon would catch Daenerys watching him from across the courtyard as he checked Viserion's bandages. He could see the wariness in her eyes, but also grudging admiration. Their closeness to the dragons bound them in a way that neither could fully articulate. Tyrion, Grey Worm, and a small council hammered out new laws. Jon attended those sessions, but he often grew restless. The intricacies of governance reminded him of all the politics he had never enjoyed. He would have preferred to be in the field, ensuring the city's safety or helping the wounded. Yet he remained because Daenerys' rule needed guidance. She insisted that he be there, that together they would shape the realm. 2 Targaryens, one purpose, she would say, though sometimes her tone was clipped as if reminding herself. At last, once Rhaegal and Viserion were nearly back to health, came the day Jon feared might unravel everything. A group of landed knights arrived from the Crownlands, escorted by Unsullied. They had once served under the Lannisters, but now they wished to swear fealty on the condition that Daenerys recognized their traditional rights and spared them from further destruction. Daenerys agreed to hear them out in the throne room. Jon stood at her side. Tyrion observed from behind a pillar, always assessing. The knights, garbed in dusty finery, bowed low. Their spokesman, a lanky man with lines of worry carved into his face, spoke for them. "Your Grace, we pledge ourselves to your house, acknowledging you as Queen of the 7 Kingdoms." He paused, eyes sliding to Jon. "And we also acknowledge your consort?" A mild ripple of amusement and curiosity passed through the onlookers. Daenerys' expression froze. The knight, sensing a misstep, hurried on. "Or is it co-ruler? Forgive us, we only know the rumor that a 2nd Targaryen rides your dragons and might also claim the throne." Silence. Daenerys' features remained poised, but tension crackled. Jon's stomach knotted. He stepped forward to clarify. "I have no claim beyond what the Queen grants me. I serve her cause." The knights exchanged glances, uncertain. Tyrion intervened with a smooth clearing of his throat. "Indeed, Lord Snow, or should I say Lord Targaryen, has sworn fealty to her grace. You have nothing to fear. Serve the Queen loyally and all shall prosper." The knights seemed partially reassured, but Daenerys' knuckles whitened on the arm of the throne. Jon could sense her annoyance, her fear that whispers about him might encourage open dissent. She forced a smile, dismissing them with the typical pleasantries. Once they were gone, she rose abruptly, stepped down from the throne, and strode away, ignoring Tyrion's attempt to engage her in conversation. Jon followed, worry gnawing at him. He caught up to her in a quieter hallway near a window that overlooked the city. She stood with arms folded, staring at the sprawl of rooftops below. Drogon's silhouette glided by overhead, a fleeting shadow across the stone floor. "They see you as a threat," she said flatly, not turning around. "Or worse, a rival. I've done nothing to you." "I know." She turned, eyes fierce. "You've been loyal. But rumors have a life of their own. Some men will see in you the male line of House Targaryen, a stronger claim by virtue of Westerosi tradition. And you ride dragons are dragons." Jon felt a stab of sympathy. "I can step back. Leave the city if that would help." Her expression shifted as if the very thought of him leaving disturbed her. "No. I need your counsel. I need to show strength. But we must find a way to quell these whispers. If the lords think they can play us against each other, they'll try." He regarded her softly. "We stand together, Daenerys. They'll see that in time." She exhaled, her anger softening. If only it were that simple. Over the following days, they made a concerted effort to present a united front. Daenerys, crowned officially in the eyes of the city's leaders, decreed that Jon Snow was her hand in all matters of the realm, second only to her. Tyrion became master of laws, a position that gave him the freedom to manage governance without overshadowing Jon's new role. The hierarchy was clarified and rumors of Jon's claims slowly quieted. Some in the city cynically believed it was just a facade. Others who saw the closeness between the 2 Targaryens were convinced they were indeed partners, perhaps soon to wed. Jon found the role demanding. He was no politician by nature, but the experience gleaned from leading the Night's Watch and forging alliances in the north served him well. He championed fairer distribution of food, ensuring that the city's poorest would not starve. Daenerys, always mindful of slights and potential betrayals, relied on him to sense the common folk's mood. She used the dragon's presence judiciously, letting them soar above the city on scheduled patrols, a silent but terrifying reminder of her power. Occasionally, Jon joined her in those flights. Sometimes he even took Viserion to the skies, testing the pale dragon's healing progress. The city slowly stabilized. Markets reopened, blacksmiths hammered away, and the harbor welcomed trading ships from the narrow sea. A kind of guarded hope emerged, overshadowed by the memory of recent wars. The realm had never seen such a concentration of Targaryen might since the original conquest. The question on everyone's lips was whether Daenerys would become a beloved monarch or a dreaded tyrant. Jon watched her closely for signs of the latter. He remained at her side, reminding her of mercy. She seemed to value his counsel, though the tension between them still simmered. Then came the news that scattered the fragile peace. A cluster of lords in the Reach had banded together, refusing to acknowledge the new queen. They claimed distant ties to House Baratheon or Lannister, or invoked the old faith to undermine a Targaryen queen. Some said they would march upon King's Landing to depose her. The force was not large, nothing compared to the dragons, but they had enough men to wreak havoc. When word reached the capital, Tyrion urged negotiations. Jon agreed, hoping to avoid another bloodbath. Daenerys considered, then decided on a bold move. "We fly to meet them," she declared. "Let them see the dragons, see the power of House Targaryen, and bend the knee before we must shed blood. If they refuse, we end the threat quickly." Jon's heart tightened. "We should be careful. There could be traps. More scorpions, hidden alliances." She almost smiled. "That's why you'll be by my side, and the dragons will guard us." Word was sent that the queen would meet the rebel lords near a field outside the city, giving them a chance to parley. Jon and Daenerys mounted their dragons, she on Drogon, he on Regal, while Viserion, still healing, took flight a moment later under no rider, simply following Jon's bidding. The three soared over the walls of King's Landing, causing the city to collectively gasp. Civilians, knights, and lords all looked up at the blazing silhouettes in the sky. Grey Worm led a small contingent of Unsullied on horseback. Tyrion, lacking the stomach for direct confrontation, stayed behind in the red keep to manage any fallout. In a wide meadow some leagues from the city, they found the assembled ranks of the rebel lords, perhaps 1,000 men, with a few battered siege engines. When the dragons descended in a tornado of wind and dust, the men blanched, horses reared, and banners trembled. Daenerys and Jon dismounted. Viserion landed behind them, a silent threat. Drogon growled, exhaling a gust of hot breath that made the rebel horses neigh in terror. The rebel leaders emerged, wearing armor with old sigils scratched out or replaced. They were a ragged alliance of lesser houses, united mostly by fear and prejudice against what they deemed a foreign queen. One, an older man with a battered sigil of House Hightower, stepped forward. "My father died in service to a rightful king, not a dragon queen," he spat, though his voice trembled. Daenerys eyed him coolly. "And your father's rightful king was who? The Mad King? The usurper Robert Baratheon? Joffrey the Tyrant? Tommen, manipulated by Lannisters? Or Cersei, who nearly burned this realm?" She let her gaze sweep the line of men, her presence regal and formidable. "The Iron Throne is mine now by right of blood and conquest. Surrender, and you will be granted clemency." Jon watched the men's reactions. Many were terrified, but pride kept them from bending. One younger knight stepped forward, defiance in his eyes. "We will not bow to a queen who threatens us with fire and blood. Look at your dragons, your swords. This is intimidation, not rightful rule." Jon stepped in. "She offers peace, not destruction. But if you raise arms against the crown, you leave her no choice." The older Hightower lord sneered. "You wear stark leathers, yet you stand with a dragon queen. The North must surely hate you for it." Jon felt a flicker of anger. The North stands for the living, for a realm free from tyranny. Daenerys Targaryen helped save the realm from the Night King. That's why I stand with her. The younger knight glared. "Stories. My father claims no whites ever threatened his lands. He says the North uses that tale for leverage. We won't be cowed by fantasies. Daenerys took a step closer, her voice ice cold. I could show you something more tangible than fantasy. She raised a hand, gesturing to Drogon, who let out a deafening roar, spewing a column of flame harmlessly into the air. The rebel ranks shuddered, some stumbling backward. A hush fell. Then, from among the men, a handful dropped to one knee. The fear of dragonfire was too great, the memory of the scorpion ambush overshadowed by the reality of 3 dragons now. The older Hightower Lord and the younger knight wavered. They glanced behind them, seeing that many of their men had already faltered. Bend the knee, Jon said firmly, though quietly. Or fight a battle you cannot win. If you truly care for your people, you'll spare them. At last, the older man's shoulders slumped. He sank to one knee, bitterness etched across his face. The younger knight followed suit, trembling with anger. One after another, the rebel force bent the knee. Daenerys surveyed them with measured satisfaction. Jon felt a brief wave of relief. Another confrontation ended without bloodshed. The rebellion collapsed like a poorly built wall. Grey Worm's unit took their weapons, and Daenerys addressed them. Swear fealty, pay your taxes, aid the realm. In return, you'll be protected. Resist again, and the next time we meet, the dragons will not spare you. With that ultimatum delivered, the rebel lords were dismissed. Their men trudged away, heads lowered. Jon watched them go, uneasy but relieved. He turned to Daenerys, expecting to see the exultant pride of a queen who had just averted war. Instead, he found her expression troubled. They will resent me, she said under her breath. They may bend the knee, but not their hearts. They'll learn, Jon offered, not entirely certain. In time, if you show them justice, they'll see past their fear. She nodded, staring into the distance. Drogon coiled his neck near her, seeking comfort. She ran a hand along his scales. Viserion ambled closer to Jon, brushing a wing against him as if to say, we have done what we set out to do. That night, they returned to King's Landing triumphant, but the mood was subdued. Another rebellion quelled, more hearts won by fear. Jon wondered if one day Daenerys would become so used to using the dragons to control the realm that she would forget mercy altogether. He recalled how her father, the Mad King, once threatened to burn entire cities. He pushed the thought away. She was not her father. Yet the seeds of fear were there. Jon could sense the longing in Daenerys for acceptance, for love from the realm, yet the dragons were her most tangible means of power. If the realm refused to love her, might she not force it to kneel through terror? Tom drifted on. A coronation was planned, a grand ceremony to firmly establish Daenerys as queen in the eyes of all Westeros. Lords, ladies, and envoys from the free cities were invited. The city hummed with activity, streets were cleaned, rubble cleared, and the masses prepared for feasts. Banners bearing the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen fluttered from the ramparts. Tyrion orchestrated the event with typical cunning. Jon oversaw security with Grey Worm, ensuring no rebel infiltration. The dragons were given pride of place, a roost near the rebuilt walls, on display for all to witness. On the day of the coronation, the Great September, rebuilt in a modest form after its destruction by wildfire under Cersei, was thronged with nobles and commoners. Daenerys, in a regal gown of black and red, made her slow procession down the aisle. Jon accompanied her, wearing stark gray accented with Targaryen red. He felt the stares of hundreds of eyes, some curious, some wary, some hopeful. High-ranking lords stood in attendance, including some from the north who had come for the spectacle. Sansa had remained behind in Winterfell, citing her duties, but she sent her blessings. The banners of the north, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Reach, and Dorne were present in partial form, each region represented by either a loyal lord or an envoy. The ceremony was somber and magnificent. A new High Septon performed the rites, placing upon Daenerys' head a glittering crown adorned with rubies shaped like dragon's eyes. With that, she was declared Daenerys of the House Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of the Undulls and the Rhoynar, and the first men, protector of the realm. The crowd, uncertain but compelled, erupted in applause. Bells tolled across the city. As Daenerys turned to face them, the torches along the aisles flickered, the stained glass windows reflected the sun's rays, and for a moment she looked every inch the triumphant queen. At her side, Jon bowed his head. He felt a pang of uncertainty about his own place in this new order. Yet he also felt a strange, quiet pride. He had helped bring this about. He had supported Daenerys, tamed the threat of the undead, and now, for better or worse, the realm was under the banner of House Targaryen once again. When Daenerys stepped from the September onto the broad steps outside, a roar split the sky. Drogon descended, landing on the plaza. Rhaegal and Viserion followed, though Viserion's flight was still less graceful than before. The crowd gasped, some screaming, others cheering. The queen lifted a hand commanding silence. The dragons roared in unison, a triumphant chorus that shook the city's foundations. The moment was a living tapestry of Targaryen might. In that thunderous hush, Daenerys turned to Jon and softly said, "Ride with me." He hesitated only a moment, then nodded. Before the masses, he climbed onto Rhaegal's back, the green dragon snarling in exultation. Daenerys mounted Drogon, giving a signal. Viserion flared its wings. Then, before the eyes of thousands, 3 dragons took flight, their riders blazing through the sky above King's Landing. The wind roared in Jon's ears, adrenaline pounding in his veins. Below, the city spread out like a tapestry of stone and people. The dread and wonder of the crowd formed a palpable energy. Side by side, Daenerys and Jon guided Drogon and Rhaegal in sweeping arcs around the city, a breathtaking aerial pageant. Viserion followed, no rider upon its pale back, but still under Jon's silent command. The sun gleamed off their scales, fire danced in their throats, and the new queen's banner rippled in the wind. This was House Targaryen reborn. As they soared, Jon caught Daenerys' eye. She wore a radiant smile tinged with tears. In that moment, he saw not the conqueror, not the queen threatened by rebellion, but a woman exulting in a dream fulfilled. For one bright instant, the realm seemed at peace, unified under fire and blood, but also under hope. The city below erupted in cheers, some in awe, some in fear, but many in something akin to wonder. The illusions of the past were gone, a new era had begun. When they landed once more on the Red Keep's highest courtyard, the sun had descended toward the horizon, bathing the dragons in golden light. Daenerys and Jon dismounted, breathless. The dragons rumbled contentedly, Viserion fanning its wings as if savoring the wind. A hush fell as Tyrion, Grey Worm, and others approached. The queen stood tall, glancing at Jon. For an instant, he felt that old camaraderie, that bond forged in battle against the undead. They had faced so much together. Maybe now they could rule wisely, side by side. But in his heart, Jon understood that the challenges were far from over. The realm needed more than might, it needed healing, compassion, stability. Daenerys carried within her the capacity for both mercy and destruction. And he, Aegon Targaryen, the second dragon rider, would have to help guide her toward the path of justice, not let fear and power consume her. He wrapped an arm gently around Daenerys' waist, and she leaned into him, her crown glinting under the dying sun. Drogon loomed behind them like a massive shadow, watchful and proud. Rhaegal hissed softly, bruised but loyal. Viserion, scarred and pale, let out a gentle croon. Together, they gazed over the city that had once been the seat of the Targaryen dynasty, destroyed by rebellion, reclaimed by fate. "We'll make it better," Daenerys whispered as if reading his thoughts. "We must." Jon nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. Far below, in the streets, the bells tolled again, echoing through the labyrinth of King's Landing. It sounded less like a warning now and more like a herald of change. So it was that Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, rode all 3 dragons into King's Landing, forging a fragile hope for a new reign. A realm once shattered by war now looked up at the sky and saw dragons dancing. And in that dance, there was fear, there was power, but there was also a promise that, perhaps, the worst was behind them. If the dragons could heal their wounds, maybe so too could the realm. And if darkness rose once more, if ever a threat came to break the fragile peace, the memory of 3 dragons, united under 2 Targaryens, would stand guard over Westeros, reminding all that as terrifying as dragonfire might be. It was also the torch that lit the realm's future, a flame of both destruction and rebirth, entrusted, for this moment in history, to 2 rulers bound by blood, promise, and the roaring might of the creatures they commanded. The soft amber glow of dusk settled on the Red Keep's high courtyard as Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen stood together, watching the last streaks of sunset fade behind the walls of King's Landing. At their backs loomed the great forms of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, each in varying states of rest. The dragons seemed calmer than they had been even that very morning, as though they, too, sensed that a new chapter was opening for the realm. Down in the winding streets of King's Landing, people still whispered in awe of the coronation that had just taken place. Bells had tolled, thousands had gathered, and Daenerys had been crowned before the eyes of all. And through it all, Jon had taken flight on Rhaegal beside her, the living embodiment of another Targaryen legacy, her fellow rider, her supporter, and though few spoke it aloud, the man who might also be a king. In the days following the coronation, a sense of cautious anticipation settled over the capital. The city's new queen held court regularly in the throne room, issuing decrees to stabilize the realm. Food shipments were organized more efficiently, the poor were guaranteed a ration of bread, and the gold cloaks, those city watchmen who had once served under Cersei, were reorganized and placed under the strict oversight of Grey Worm and the Unsullied. Tyrion Lannister, now master of laws, took on countless responsibilities, poring over ledgers and records late into the night with the diligence of a man determined to redeem his family name. Jon, meanwhile, oversaw both the security of King's Landing and the continued healing of the dragons. His new role, publicly declared as the Queen's Hand, required him to be at Daenerys' side often, but they agreed that Tyrion's skill in politics left Jon free to handle matters of morale, watchful peace, and bridging the gap with suspicious northerners who had traveled south. A tall order, but as a man who had once served as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch and then King in the North, he understood responsibility when it weighed upon him. A week passed, then two, and the city's tension gradually eased. Builders repaired battered streets, new supply caravans arrived under the Queen's protection, and ships from Essos dropped anchor in Blackwater Bay, bringing goods to trade. Daenerys took every opportunity to show fairness tempered by unwavering resolve. She publicly forgave certain minor lords who had joined the recent rebellion on the condition of immediate fealty. A few who conspired to overthrow her, even after bending the knee, were dragged into the throne room to face her justice. Rather than giving in to the impulse to burn them as an example, she allowed them trial by the laws of Westeros, albeit with stern sentences. Jon was relieved by this, hoping it signaled her commitment to ruling through a balance of strength and clemency. Some nights, Daenerys and Jon would walk together on the high walls near the Red Keep, gazing at the city. From there, they could hear distant music in taverns or see small gatherings of people lighting lanterns in prayer. He sensed how deeply Daenerys wanted the people to accept her. She had come from across the sea, liberated countless in Meereen and Yunkai, and now she was determined to prove she was no conqueror by cruelty, but a unifier and protector. Yet she bore the Targaryen name, and fire danced in her blood. Now and again, Jon caught glimpses of that airing intensity in her eyes, the knowledge that if people would not accept her kindly, she still had 3 dragons to ensure their obedience. One day, ravens arrived bearing news from the north and the Vale. Sansa Stark remained in Winterfell, seeing to the harvest and sending word of her willingness to provide shipments of grain as part of the realm's consolidation. Arya was roaming still, a free spirit, though Sansa's letter offered no specifics about her whereabouts. The Vale Lords, after some hesitation, sent envoys to demonstrate their grudging acceptance of Daenerys' rule. Lord Royce and the Knights of the Vale made it clear they had no appetite for another war. The Riverlands, ravaged during the War of the Five Kings, were also quick to send minimal tribute, anxious to avoid Dragonfire. Meanwhile, the Westerlands, still reeling from the downfall of House Lannister's dominion, seemed to have no central power aside from a few minor lords who recognized Daenerys in a perfunctory sense. Gold mines in the Westerlands had run dry, rumor said, so they had little to offer but leftover pride. The Iron Islands were a trickier question. Yara Greyjoy was said to be queen there, having regained most of the isles in the wake of Euron's death, but she had not yet come to court to affirm her fealty. No one knew if she intended to declare independence or accept Targaryen rule. Jon worried that if the Ironborn tested Daenerys' patience, more war could follow. Tyrion advised caution. The queen herself felt that the Iron Islanders might be allowed some autonomy, provided they did not raid the mainland. She had once promised Yara the possibility of independence if she helped fight against Cersei and the White Walkers. Let them keep to their isles and name themselves kings or queens of the rocks, she said to Jon one evening, standing in a half-lit corridor of the Red Keep. So long as they don't threaten my realm, I have no desire to burn their ships. Jon gave a nod of understanding. Peace with them is wise, for now. The realm has bled enough. He could see her shoulders ease at his agreement. They had found a sort of equilibrium since she was crowned. He tried to remind himself that it was never quite that simple, realms were complex, and old loyalties could shift at any moment. Yet for the time being, quiet reigned in King's Landing. Weeks turned into a moon's turn, and on a brisk morning, a curious message arrived by Raven from Dorne. The letter came from a newly ascendant prince of Dorne, so the letter styled him, one Lord Corey Jordain, claiming to represent the major houses in the peninsula. With House Martell in disarray after Ilaria Sand and the Sand Snakes were defeated, Dorne's leadership had fractured. Now this Jordain proclaimed that he stood as a uniting figure and that he wished to travel north to offer homage to Daenerys Targaryen and see if she might remember the old alliance House Targaryen had once forged with Dorne through marriage and treaties. Tyrion eyed the letter skeptically, as the Jordain were a smaller house historically overshadowed by the Martells. but Daenerys decided to accept the approach. She hoped that if Dorne joined her alliance, it would further stabilize the realm's southern flank. A meeting was arranged to take place in the city, an official welcome for the new Dornish delegation. As the day approached, the Red Keep prepared a modest banquet. Tapestries were cleaned, fruit was ordered from the crownlands to accommodate Dornish tastes, and the dragons were fed well in the outer yard so they would be less likely to prowl near the visiting dignitaries. Jon oversaw security measures, ensuring the new gold cloaks and the Unsullied patrolled the gates. These things reminded him of how thoroughly life had changed since he first arrived in King's Landing on a humble mission for the Night's Watch many years ago. Now he was the hand of the Queen, a Targaryen in truth, commanding dragons. He did not relish power for its own sake, but he recognized how it could serve the realm. That afternoon, the Dornish party arrived through the gates. They brought a small retinue, perhaps 20 horsemen, wearing the bright colors of oranges, reds, and golds that evoked the blazing sun of Dorne. At their head rode Corey Jordain, a lean, dark-haired lord in his 30s with skin bronzed by the southern sun. He wore a sardonic smile, and his confident posture suggested a man used to taking risks. Beside him was a young woman who might have been his sister or cousin, similarly attired in airy fabrics. They showed little fear, though the sight of 3 dragons perched atop the Red Keep walls must have unnerved even the boldest. Daenerys greeted them in the throne room, sitting upon the Iron Throne in regal black and red, flanked by Grey Worm and Tyrion. Jon stood off to her right side, an observer as well as her supporter. The Dornish party bowed, though not as deeply as some. Corey Jordain introduced himself with flowery language, praising House Targaryen's restoration and speaking of old alliances from the time of Rhaenys Targaryen and Marya Martell. He spoke well, clearly aiming to flatter Daenerys without sounding subservient. Tyrion, arms crossed behind his back, murmured that they ought to let the Dornishmen speak. So Daenerys listened as Corey explained his vision of a new, stable Dorne, independent in local governance but part of the realm under House Targaryen's overlordship. In exchange, he offered trade in spices, wines, and exotic produce that only Dorne could cultivate. He hinted that if Daenerys were to name him officially as Prince of Dorne, the region might know a lasting peace. Jon recognized that the man was angling for official legitimization of his rule, something only the crown could grant. Daenerys, after conferring briefly with Tyrion, stated that she was open to the idea, but she made it clear that Dorne must provide fealty and aid, including men if the realm faced future threats. Corey Jordain nodded easily, as though that were hardly a price to pay, but a faint glimmer in his eye suggested he was well aware of the seriousness of the condition. Over the following days, the Dornish remained in the capital, negotiating details with Tyrion, sampling the city's culture, and forging relationships. Daenerys hosted them in the Red Keep, offering banquets at which Dornish harpists and Westerosi drummers performed in lively harmony. Jon, not much for feasts, would stand at the fringes, sipping wine and quietly observing. He noticed how Corey would shoot glances at the Queen, measuring her, as if assessing how far her mercy and generosity extended. One night, after a long banquet, Corey Jordain approached Jon as he stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The Dornishman eyed him with polite curiosity. "You're the hand of the Queen, yet also known as a Targaryen," he said. "There are tales that you ride dragons just as easily as Daenerys does." Jon inclined his head warily. He was never one to speak idly of his powers, nor did he trust a stranger's motives. "The dragons allowed me to ride, yes." A wry smile. "A formidable sight, I hear, and something that might shape the future of the Seven Kingdoms." Jon met the man's gaze. "The future is shaped by many things: fear, hope, negotiation, justice, and dragons," Corey added, glancing up at the sky where faint silhouettes of Regal and Viserion occasionally passed. "Men can talk of chivalry and honor, but there's no ignoring the beast of flame overhead." Jon let the statement hang in the air. He recalled the ambush in King's Landing, the scorpion bolts, the screams of wounded dragons. He had no illusions. The realm feared these creatures, and with good reason. "You speak the truth. We aim to use that power wisely, not to burn entire kingdoms to ash." Corey nodded. "Dorne will hold you to that, Lord Targaryen. We've felt the sting of dragonfire in the past, but I see a different path this time. Let us hope it remains so." With that, The Dornishman gave a small bow and took his leave. Jon wondered if the man's words were an overt warning. If Daenerys' rule turned toward tyranny, Dorne might rise in revolt, or else turn to sabotage. He sighed, feeling the weight of such possibilities. Being a Targaryen in King's Landing was a fragile honor, balancing mercy with the fearsome legacy of House Targaryen's old conquests. At last, when all negotiations concluded and the final terms were written, Daenerys publicly named Corey Jordan as Prince of Dorne. A lavish ceremony was held in the throne room, where Corey knelt and swore fealty. Daenerys granted him dominion over the Dornish lords on condition that they honor the realm, keep the peace, and send their trade goods north. The Dornish party departed with official recognition and under watchful eyes. Jon could almost sense Tyrion's relief that the southern border was no longer an immediate problem, but he also saw the hand of the Queen's own concerns about trusting a new prince so untested. Regardless, for now Dorne and the crown were at peace. Soon after, word reached King's Landing that the North was stable under Lady Sansa's stewardship, but there were grumblings among certain northern bannermen that Jon Snow, once their king in the North, had bent the knee to Daenerys without truly consulting them. Some saw the Targaryen queen as an outsider who might one day attempt to subjugate the North by force. Others recognized that Daenerys had aided in the war against the undead. Most grudgingly accepted the new order, but the undercurrent of resentment remained. Jon, feeling the tug of his homeland, discussed with Daenerys the possibility of traveling north to ease these tensions. She considered it carefully. As queen, she was loath to leave the capital so soon, but recognized that forging true unity required trust. Tyrion counseled caution. Long journeys exposed them to risk, and King's Landing's peace was still precarious. Yet Daenerys knew that ignoring the North's misgivings might sow deeper division. After a series of private talks, they chose a middle path. Jon would ride north with a small retinue accompanied by Rhaegal to display the crown's might. Daenerys would remain to govern from King's Landing, accompanied by Drogon and Viserion. By traveling alone, Jon might reduce northern fears of a southern occupation while still reminding them he was, indeed, a Targaryen dragon rider. If all went well, Sansa and the northern lords would be reassured that the crown respected their autonomy. Preparations for Jon's journey occupied the next week. Grey Worm assigned a modest escort of unsullied 50 men to ride with Jon and a few loyal northerners who had stayed in King's Landing. Tyrion lamented that he could not accompany them, but his presence was needed in the capital. Daenerys expressed mixed emotions about Jon's departure. More than once, he caught her looking at him with an undercurrent of worry. Perhaps she feared that, among his own people, he might decide to remain in the north and challenge her indirectly. Or perhaps she feared for his safety. He reassured her as best he could. Before dawn on the chosen day, Jon stood in the courtyard near Rhaegal. The dragon was healthy again, the old wound healed, though a faint scar could still be seen across its scaled flank. As stable hands loaded supplies, Daenerys appeared, her hair intricately braided, wearing a cloak trimmed in black and red fur. She approached with purposeful strides. "I wish I could go with you," she said quietly, her voice carrying regret. "The North was once my enemy, now I would see it as an ally. But it's best I remain here for the realm." Jon nodded, stepping forward. "You're the queen. You're needed more than ever to solidify this peace. Besides, the Northerners remember many things. It might be gentler for me to approach them alone." She sighed, gazing at Rhaegal's emerald wings. "Then I trust you to make them see. We mean to protect them, not rule them with an iron fist. Bring them back into the fold." He promised he would. She inclined her head, hesitated, then reached up and placed a gentle hand on his cheek. He leaned into her touch, ignoring the curious stares of the Unsullied. The moment lingered, both of them aware that many eyes were always upon them. Then she withdrew her hand and he climbed onto Rhaegal's back. The escort of Unsullied and northern riders would follow on horseback, traveling the King's Road. Jon, however, intended to fly part of the journey, crossing the Crownlands quickly and descending to camp with his soldiers when needed. The plan was to arrive in Winterfell well before the men on foot, giving him time to speak with Sansa and set the tone. Then the soldiers would come as a ceremonial presence, not an army of conquest. With a roar that rattled the stones, Rhaegal spread its wings and leapt into the sky. The wind whipped past Jon's face, carrying him high over the spires of the Red Keep. The city unfurled below, a patchwork of rooftops and winding streets. He guided the dragon into a northward climb, passing above the gates, the roads, and farmland beyond. Guards craned their necks in awe. Jon gazed back once over his shoulder. From the highest rampart, he could make out Daenerys' solitary figure, cloak fluttering, small as a distant shadow. He felt a pang, but he set his jaw and turned his eyes northward. King's Landing shrank behind him and the horizon stretched wide. Flying was always disorienting. He felt both exhilaration and an odd sense of detachment, as though the land below was mere parchment on which the roads and rivers were sketched. Riegel's powerful wingbeats thrummed beneath him. The dragon's warmth kept him from freezing, even as the air grew steadily colder. Once or twice, Jon spied small villages, smoke drifting from chimneys. He tried not to frighten the inhabitants unnecessarily, keeping Riegel high. He touched down periodically to let Riegel rest and to eat something himself, dried meat, hard bread, and water. Because the unsullied escort traveled at a normal pace, days passed with Jon forging ahead, then looping back to check on their progress and forging ahead again. He slept sometimes in small way station inns or in the open fields beside Riegel, who curled protectively around him. The people he encountered were equal parts terrified and amazed, never expecting to see a green dragon descend from the clouds. Yet Jon's quiet demeanor and the manner in which Riegel remained calm convinced many that they were not in immediate peril. Some even bowed, murmuring, "My Lord Targaryen" or "My King," though he corrected them that he was only the Queen's hand. As they ventured deeper into the riverlands, the climate grew cooler, the farmlands more sparse. Word spread quickly that Jon Snow, the Targaryen rider, was headed north with a small retinue. A few local lords emerged from their seats to pay their respects, including a Blackwood knight and a Bracken squire, old rivals who seemed united only by fear of the crown. Jon accepted their courtesies, though he made no demands. He merely asked for safe passage and rest for his men, which they granted. The sight of Riegel's wings overhead certainly helped. Crossing from the riverlands into the neck took him through damp marshes. The humidity clung to everything, but the vegetation grew thick and green. Here, Riegel proved a challenge to feed. Fish and small animals abounded, but the dragon needed something more substantial. Jon found a few local trappers who, initially, were so frightened by the dragon's presence they nearly flung themselves into the bog. He reassured them, paying silver for any large boars or game they could provide. Eventually, he managed to gather enough to keep Riegel placated. Passing the Moat Cailin approach, Jon felt a stirring of memory. The last time he'd come this way, dire events had been in motion. The wars, the betrayals, the specter of the undead. Now, he traveled as a representative of the Queen in King's Landing. Once or twice, he caught himself wondering how Ned Stark would have viewed these changes. Would Ned have approved of his son, his nephew, allying with a Targaryen? Or would he be proud that Jon sought to bring peace after so many years of turmoil? Those thoughts lingered as he flew onward. At last, the rolling, pine-laden hills of the north stretched before him. The cold air hit him like a familiar friend, biting at his cheeks. Snow dusted the road in patches. He soared over the King's Road for a while, scanning the horizon until he glimpsed the distant towers of Winterfell. Even from the sky, the ancient castle evoked a sense of home, though so much had changed within its walls. He guided Riegel into a wide, circling descent, mindful of the watchers on the battlements below. Horns sounded in alarm as the dragon appeared, but no scorpion bolts or arrows flew, for the guards recognized the rider's face. Jon braced himself for a rough landing in the courtyard, hoping the castle's inhabitants had cleared enough space. Riegel let out a rumble that shook the old stones. The watchers scattered from the yard, giving him a wide berth. With a final beat of wings, the dragon alit on the packed earth, claws scraping. Jon swung down, heart pounding from the flight. At once, a group of people emerged from the gatehouse, guards in Stark livery, some he recognized. There was also Sansa Stark, her red hair bound in a thick braid, wearing a gray cloak lined with fur. Her posture was rigid with surprise or perhaps apprehension, though her face betrayed no fear. Behind her, Brienne of Tarth stood tall and polished mail, hand near her sword but not drawing it. Jon stepped forward, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions. Sansa's eyes flicked toward Riegel, who prowled restlessly, smoke curling from its nostrils. Then she turned back to Jon, took in the sight of him in Targaryen-influenced attire, and inclined her head. "Welcome home," she said softly. "We heard you might be coming, but we weren't quite expecting this." Jon glanced at Riegel, then back to her. "I thought it best to arrive quickly to talk with you before my escort arrives." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "You've come as the hand of the Queen, or as my brother?" The question hung in the cold air. He took a breath. "Both, if it must be. But always your brother in heart, no matter my name." Her features softened slightly and she stepped forward to embrace him. He returned the gesture, ignoring Riegel's low hiss of impatience. The watchers seemed to relax, seeing the sign of familial warmth. Even Brienne allowed herself a small smile. When they broke apart, Sansa cast another wary glance at the dragon. Should we have our paddocks prepared? I'm not sure Winterfell is accustomed to hosting a dragon. Jon couldn't help a faint chuckle. He'll need open space. Feed too, preferably sheep or goats. He won't remain in the courtyard for long. I can encourage him to roost in the outer fields. Wordlessly, Sansa signaled a pair of stable hands. They nodded fearfully and hurried off to gather what they could. The watchers at the ramparts continued to stare, enraptured and alarmed. Rhaegal gave a snort, stretching his wings, stirring dust and snow in swirling patterns. Within the hour, Jon and Sansa made their way indoors, leaving Rhaegal to devour a pair of goats in the open yard. The great hall of Winterfell was warm with a roaring hearth, the walls lined with banners bearing the direwolf sigil. Servants scurried about with bread and ale. Brienne accompanied them, offering a protective presence by Sansa's side. The Lady of Winterfell seated herself at the high table, gesturing for Jon to join her. All was not as full as it might have been on a feast day, but a handful of important northern bannermen were present. Men like Lord Glover, Lord Serwyn, and a few others. They wore guarded expressions. Jon broke the tension by recounting his journey, his plan to meet with them regarding the realm's new order. Sansa listened carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions. She inquired about Daenerys' intentions toward the north, whether the queen would impose southern ways upon them, and how the battered families might find relief from the crown. Jon explained that Daenerys recognized the North's unique traditions and had no desire to smother them, but that she did expect loyalty in return. The crown, he stressed, would help provide resources for rebuilding what the war against the undead had cost. The conversation that followed was delicate. Several bannermen voiced skepticism that a Targaryen queen in King's Landing would truly care for the North beyond its value as territory. Another questioned whether Daenerys would press for direct oversight or attempt to station southern soldiers in Winterfell. Jon was patient, recalling how the Night's Watch had made him adept at mediating tensions. He assured them that no such stationing was planned, beyond normal courtesy visits or traveling knights, and that he was here precisely to ensure the North's voice was heard. Sansa's posture remained calm but firm. What if the lords choose to remain apart, not in open rebellion, but to keep the North separate? That was once the reason they crowned you king in the North. We haven't changed our minds about southern meddling. Jon met her gaze. I understand, but I bent the knee for a reason. Daenerys aided us against the Night King. The realm owes her. And if we stand alone now, with the realm united under the Targaryen banner, we risk further divisions. In the end, unity may be the only way to safeguard these lands from whatever next threat comes. Would you risk another war with the South? A hush settled. Sansa studied the swirling grains of the table's wood. At last, she sighed. We have no wish for more war. Winterfell's people need rest, harvest, and peace. If acknowledging Daenerys Targaryen is the price, so be it. But the North must remain under Stark authority, answering to you, if you are indeed still of us. Jon knew that last phrase carried a hidden question. Did he see himself as a Stark first, or as a Targaryen? For a moment, he simply sat there, feeling the old pain of identity. Then he answered quietly, Ned Stark raised me. The blood of the North runs in my veins, no matter what name I bear. That won't change. Sansa's tension eased. She looked to the gathered lords. Then let us accept the Queen's protection and remain loyal as the hand, my brother, requests. But in return, we expect the freedom to rule our own day-to-day affairs. That's how it's been for centuries before the Targaryens came. We will not be trifled with. A few of the lords murmured agreement. Jon nodded. It was a fair stance, and it aligned with the Queen's current approach. Let each region manage its affairs so long as they do not break the realm's peace or question the crown's sovereignty. That evening, a modest feast was held in Jon's honor. The great hall filled with warm chatter, old voices, and flickering torchlight. He saw familiar faces among the serving staff, men and women who remembered him from his youth. Ghosts of the past seemed to linger in every corner. Yet when he thought to slip out for a moment's quiet, the lords pressed him for more conversation about the state of King's Landing, the Queen's rule, or the dragon's nature. By the time he finally found a moment alone, it was late and the fires were dying down to embers. Slipping outside, he found that Rhaegal had flown to the outer fields, choosing open ground to curl up near a small copse of trees. Snow drifted from a star-strewn sky. Jon walked across the frosty yard, footprints crunching. He felt strangely comforted by the crisp northern air. Rhaegal seemed to sense his approach, lifting its head and giving a low rumble of acknowledgement. Jon patted the dragon's scaled neck, his gloved hand dwarfed by the massive ridges. Rhaegal's breath steamed in the cold, and the rising moon lit the dragon's green hide with a silvery sheen. For a time, Jon simply stood there, silent in the quiet of the northern night. This was a corner of the world he had once believed lost to him, along with the illusions of being Ned Stark's son. Yet now he had returned as a Targaryen, riding a beast of legend. He wondered if the old gods in the weirwood grove beyond the castle watched him with fascination or dread. In the days that followed, Jon spoke further with Sansa, with the lords, with the castle's inhabitants. He visited the crypts, kneeling before the statues of Lyanna Stark and Ned Stark. The knowledge of his true parentage still pricked him with complicated emotions. He whispered a few words to the cold stone statues, quietly hoping that wherever Ned's spirit lay, he understood and forgave the secrets that had shaped Jon's fate. Time seemed to slip by in a hush. Eventually, the unsullied escort arrived, trudging up the King's Road and entering Winterfell in disciplined columns. Though the Northmen eyed them warily, the presence of only 50 well-trained soldiers was far from an occupying force. Sansa accommodated them as well as she could, and soon enough, the men settled into designated barracks. Jon, satisfied that a workable accord had been reached, prepared for the return journey. He intended to depart with Rhaegal in a few days' time, leaving the Unsullied to travel at their pace. However, an urgent raven arrived from King's Landing late one afternoon, bearing Tyrion's seal and a terse message. Jon read it in private, brow furrowing. King's Landing is uneasy. Ironborn ships have been sighted off the Crownland's coast. Yara Greyjoy has arrived unexpectedly, claiming she wishes to negotiate. The Queen is wary. There are rumors that some of Euron's old reavers remain loyal to a different scion of House Greyjoy, but we lack clarity. Daenerys invites you to return with haste if possible. There is also talk of certain lords pressing claims. Your presence may help maintain stability. Jon read the words twice. The Iron Islands had long been unpredictable, and Yara Greyjoy had once pledged to Daenerys. But that was before the final battles and the Queen's coronation. The letter suggested that Yara might be testing Daenerys' resolve, or else seeking to clarify some promise of independence. If that were the entire issue, it might not be so dire, but the mention of certain lords pressing claims raised Jon's anxiety. Who might be pressing claims? Other Targaryen pretenders? Ambitious lords from the Reach or Stormlands? He could not be certain. Whatever the specifics, Tyrion's message was clear. King's Landing needed Jon's stabilizing influence. Even if Daenerys had no intention of surrendering or compromising her authority, the city's mood might be more balanced if Jon were there. Sansa read Tyrion's letter with him, lips tightening. "You only just arrived," she said quietly. "Already, they pull you south again." Jon nodded, a weary acceptance on his face. "The realm is large, and we're trying to hold it together. That's the cost of being in the Queen's service, and of being who I am." Sansa's gaze flicked to the window, where the pale winter sun cast long shadows. "At least let me gather the lords for a formal farewell, so you leave knowing we stand ready to honor the alliance we agreed upon. I'll ensure the North's obligations are clear and fair. Then you can return south without fear of rebellion here." He thanked her. Her expression was tinged with sadness, but she kept her composure. So they prepared a final gathering in Winterfell's hall. The lords who had once crowned Jon king in the north assembled again. Only this time they pledged to uphold the Targaryen queen's peace, so long as Jon stood by her side. He acknowledged their words, sensing the reluctant acceptance that underpinned them. Sansa, for her part, assured them that she would maintain Winterfell's traditions in Daenerys' name. On the eve of his departure, Jon visited the Godswood. The heart tree loomed there, ancient and silent, its face carved in centuries past by the children of the forest or the first men. Red leaves rustled in the breeze. Jon knelt before it, remembering the last time he had prayed here. That time he had felt lost, searching for guidance. Now he felt no less uncertain, though the questions had changed. He wondered what the old gods thought of a Targaryen in their wood, kneeling for clarity. Yet in that hush, he found a modicum of peace. He was doing what he believed was right for the realm, uniting it rather than letting it fracture. Early the next morning, he took flight again on Rhaegal's back. Sansa and the northern lords watched from the courtyard, cloaks drawn tight against the cold wind. Rhaegal soared upward, carrying Jon southward with powerful sweeps of wings. Down below, the rows of pine and snow drifted into a haze. Winterfell receded behind him. He had done what he could to secure the North's loyalty for Daenerys' reign. It would have to be enough. The journey back went faster, with no lingering stops. He pressed onward day after day, only pausing when Rhaegal needed rest or food. He saw less reason to check in with the escort this time. They could handle themselves on the roads. His mind churned with questions about the situation in King's Landing. Yara Greyjoy's arrival could herald trouble, or perhaps it was an overture of peace. Daenerys would be forced to make a decision, allow the Iron Islands a degree of independence or risk pushing them into revolt. Jon recalled that many Targaryens in history had used overwhelming force to bring the Iron Islands to heel, but in doing so, they often only sowed resentment that festered for decades. When he neared the Crownlands, the air grew milder, the land more populous. Smoke rose from villages, farmland stretched in neat fields. At last, King's Landing came into view, its walls more intact now than they had been upon Daenerys' conquest. The city was still half-scarred by old battles, but reconstruction efforts had progressed. The outline of the Red Keep perched on the rocky prominence above Blackwater Bay. Jon guided Rhaegal into a wide spiral, letting the watchers see him overhead. No scorpions or ballista bolts soared up to challenge him, only the watchful eyes of archers who recognized the green dragon. He landed within the same courtyard where he had departed. Unsullied hurried to greet him, offering bows. He dismounted, exhausted from travel but anxious for news. Grey Worm appeared with a handful of guards, giving Jon a curt nod. "The Queen awaits you in the throne room," Grey Worm said in his straightforward manner. "The Ironborn are here with Yara Greyjoy. They arrived 3 days ago." Jon caught the subtle tension in the soldier's voice. "How have things gone?" Grey Worm's unreadable expression flickered. "They've not attacked nor done anything openly hostile. But Yara demands certain terms the Queen finds bold." Jon suppressed a groan. "And these terms?" Grey Worm paused. "I do not speak for the Queen. You will hear soon enough." Needing no further prompt, Jon handed Rhaegal's reins over to the stable hands, who eyed the dragon warily and strode into the Red Keep, still dusty from travel. Tyrion intercepted him near the grand foyer. The dwarf's face was lined with worry and fatigue, but he managed a thin smile. "You've come at an opportune time," Tyrion said. "Yara has been pressing Daenerys for a formal treaty guaranteeing absolute independence for the Iron Islands. She cites the old pact that Asha, Yara, made with the Queen in the early days of their alliance before Euron's attacks. Yet Daenerys is wary of letting any region carve itself out of the realm, for fear others might follow suit. The tension in the city grows." Jon nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Has Yara threatened violence if the Queen refuses?" Tyrion led him down a corridor. "Not overtly, but her men strut about in the harbor, brandishing axes and boasting that they'll reave any Greenlander who disrespects their Queen of Salt and Rock. The City Watch tries to keep peace, but we've had a few brawls. Daenerys needs a solution that won't unravel the realm's unity." Jon recalled the vow Daenerys had once made to Yara in Dragonstone, promising independence for the Iron Islands and the North if they helped her claim the throne. But times had changed, and the North had ultimately bent the knee. Perhaps Daenerys felt that promise no longer applied, or that the realm's precarious stability overrode such an arrangement. She might consider a compromise, partial autonomy akin to Dorne's arrangement. But the Ironborn might push for more. They arrived outside the throne room where the red and black banners of House Targaryen draped the stone columns. 2 unsullied guards stood at attention. Jon nodded to them and they opened the large double doors. Inside, the throne room was illuminated by torchlight that revealed Daenerys sitting on the Iron Throne, her posture regal, her expression cool. Standing a few paces before her was Yara Greyjoy, clad in dark leathers bearing the Kraken sigil, her short black hair framing a sharp face. Behind Yara stood a half-dozen Ironborn officers, arms crossed, gazes filled with a mix of defiance and curiosity. Drogon perched on a high ledge near the back of the hall, a silent but ever-present threat. Daenerys' eyes flicked to Jon as he entered, and a faint relief sparked in them. Yara turned to regard him, arching an eyebrow. "Jon Snow," she said, her voice laced with dry amusement. "Or do you prefer Targaryen now? Either way, it's been some time." Jon inclined his head. "Yara, I heard you'd come to treat with the Queen." She made a wry grin. I mean to settle once and for all what becomes of the Iron Islands. We shed blood for Daenerys, my men died fighting Euron and, by extension, Cersei. We were promised independence once the wars were done. Now I've come to collect on that promise." Daenerys' voice cut the air. "And I have told Yara Greyjoy that the realm is in delicate balance. Should the Iron Islands break away now, so might other realms, and we would have 100 petty kingdoms at each other's throats. That will not stand." Yara's jaw tightened. "So the Queen's promises mean nothing?" Daenerys frowned. "I made no vow that would risk the fracturing of the 7 kingdoms. My exact words were that I would consider granting the Iron Islands independence if it did no harm to the realm. Right now, it would harm us all. I've offered you a measure of self-governance under the crown. The same courtesy I extended to Dorne, and indeed to the north. But you demand total separation, which I cannot allow." Jon stepped forward carefully. "Yara, I recall the promise, but things have changed. The north, too, once thought of independence, and yet we bowed to necessity. The White Walkers threatened us. Then the realm needed unity against Cersei. In war, people make desperate deals, but in peace, we must find ways to hold the realm together." Yara's eyes flicked between him and Daenerys, a flash of frustration in them. "Are we not the same folk who fought for our freedom? The Iron Islands have never bowed easily to a mainland throne. We only joined the realm under the might of Aegon the Conqueror and his dragons. If we remain inside that realm, we fear losing our ways once again." Daenerys' expression softened slightly. She leaned forward. "If your concern is preserving your culture, I have no intention to stifle the Ironborn. Keep your customs, your way of life. Rule your isles as you see fit, so long as you do not raid other lands or defy the crown's authority. But if you insist on absolute independence, you risk open conflict with me and my dragons. Does that truly serve your people?" Yara pressed her lips into a thin line. "We have ships bristling in the bay. If you unleash dragonfire, many will die on both sides. Is that the unity you desire?" A wave of tension rippled through the hall. Tyrion, standing near a pillar, cleared his throat diplomatically. "We might not need to talk of dragons or reavers if we can find a middle ground. Suppose the Iron Islands are granted the same status as Dorne once held under the Targaryen kings. Largely self-governing with minimal interference. Taxes to the crown in exchange for the crown's protection. No interference in your local rule so long as you do not break certain core laws or raid the mainland. You'd keep your title as Lady or Queen of the Iron Islands, but you'd owe fealty to her grace." Yara's gaze narrowed. "Titles aside, we want to choose our own path on the seas. The reaving is part of our tradition, though I've tried to curb the worst of it. Must we give up all we are?" Daenerys' eyes flashed. "Your tradition of reaving includes raiding innocent coastlines, enslaving or murdering the people there. That practice ends if you accept the crown's protection and fellowship. The day of savage raids must be left behind, or you'll face the realm's wrath." Silence fell. Jon could feel the tension coiling. He stepped closer. "Yara, you're not a stranger to forging new ways. You led your people against Euron, you helped us in the war for the living. You saw firsthand that the old ways only brought ruin. We don't ask you to change what defines the Ironborn's identity. The sea, the salt, the fearless spirit. But raiding the innocent has no place in the future we're building." Yara exhaled slowly. "It's easy for you to say. You have a queen and army dragons. We have salt-soaked islands and a proud tradition. If we yield too much, my people will feel betrayed. Already some question if I'm too friendly with the Targaryens and Starks." Daenerys rose from the throne, stepping down the dais to face Yara more closely. "I understand. The realm needs your ships to guard our coasts from pirates and foreign threats. In return, we respect your autonomy over the Iron Islands. You'll swear fealty, pay some taxes, less than what might be demanded of richer regions, and you'll keep your title. But the moment you revert to reaving or challenge the crown's rule, we will respond with fire. That is my final offer." The Ironborn behind Yara stirred, glancing among themselves. A tall, scarred man with a missing ear muttered something under his breath about Greenlanders. Yara shot him a warning look. She studied Daenerys, then Jon. At length, she gave a curt nod. "I see the shape of things. Very well, let's say I agree in principle. But I want it in writing, sealed by the crown. No more empty talk, or we're back to old grudges." Tyrion stepped forward, a slight smirk on his lips. "We can have the scribes prepare a formal treaty. You can add input within reason and we'll settle the matter forthwith. Yara eyed Daenerys. You won't regret this. My people will sail under our own banner, but we'll watch these coasts for you. If war comes from outside the realm, the Iron Fleet stands ready. Daenerys nodded, though her jaw remained set. Good. Let it be done. Relief seemed to ripple through the throne room. Drogon, as though sensing the tension fade, let out a deep grunt and folded his wings more tightly. Yara gave Jon a final glance, shaking her head wryly. You always find a way to meddle in Ironborn affairs, don't you, Snow? He managed a small smile. If it spares the realm from more bloodshed, I'll meddle as much as needed. With that, Yara gestured or her followers, and they exited the hall with Tyrion trailing, doubtless to hammer out the fine points of this newly minted agreement. Jon stepped aside, letting Daenerys pass. The queen paused to look at him, her expression one of mingled relief and strain. You arrived just in time, she said quietly. I feared a confrontation that might have ended in bloodshed. She was pressing me hard as if to see if I'd flinch. Jon dipped his head. It's not entirely over, but at least we have a path forward. The Ironborn needed to see you wouldn't be cowed, but also that you're not looking to annihilate them. Daenerys' gaze flickered over him, noticing the weariness in his face from travel. You must be exhausted. Come, we'll speak in private about your journey north. They walked together out of the throne room and into the dim corridors. Grey Worm took up a protective distance behind them, and a few unsullied trailed at the far edges. Servants lit torches as dusk settled. Once they reached Daenerys' private solar, she dismissed the guards at the door, granting Jon and herself a rare moment of relative solitude, though a few silent handmaidens lingered in an adjoining chamber, ready to bring wine or refresh the torches. Daenerys shed her cloak and sank onto a cushioned chair, gesturing for Jon to take another seat. He did, stretching his stiff limbs. For a moment, neither spoke. The hush felt like a bomb after the swirl of tensions in the throne room. At length, Daenerys studied him, her eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. Tell me of the north, she said softly. How's Winterfell? How's your family? Jon relayed how Sansa was well, though burdened by leadership, how the northern lords had agreed to uphold her rule so long as she respected their customs. He explained how the bitterness had not wholly faded, but that the north was exhausted by war and would not seek further conflict. Daenerys listened quietly, occasionally asking a pointed question about which houses remained the most resistant. He mentioned House Glover, House Serwyn, minor houses that had once shown fierce independence. It seems they accept me, Daenerys murmured, but only because you stand between them and me. They'll always see me as a foreign queen. Jon shrugged. Perhaps. But in time they might see your fair governance. You've given them no reason to rebel further. Let them come to trust you gradually. For now, let them cling to what they know. She nodded, exhaling slowly. Sometimes I wonder if I took on too much, uniting a realm so fractured, so riddled with old wounds. But I can't turn back. I won't allow those old hatreds and grudges to break the peace we've fought so hard for. Jon reached across the small table, taking her hand gently. She did not pull away. You won't face it alone. I promise to help you build a better world. They sat in silence for a moment, hands entwined. Outside, twilight descended on King's Landing, and faint sounds drifted from the city. Music, the cry of a street vendor, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The realm was breathing, still scarred but breathing. Daenerys' gaze dropped to their hands. I thought of the day we first flew together in the north, she said. It seems so long ago now, but perhaps that was the moment I truly believed in our alliance. You, a man of the north who had reason to hate Targaryens, flying on the back of my dragon. Jon recalled the memory vividly. The rush of cold air, the astonished looks on the faces of those gathered. It was the day everything changed for me as well. I realized that the Targaryen blood wasn't just a rumor. I could feel it in my bones. Daenerys' lips curved into a rueful smile, a lineage of conquest and fire. But we must shape a new legacy, one of peace, or at least of stable rule. He nodded. For a few heartbeats, the hush lingered, full of unspoken feelings. Their shared destiny, the complicated bond of family and oath. The love they once tried to name but had found overshadowed by war and revelation. Neither had easy words for it. In the end, Daenerys gently withdrew her hand, rising to her feet. Get some rest, she said, a subtle note of warmth in her voice. We'll speak tomorrow of these lords who press claims and see what you make of it. Tyrion believes someone in the Reach is stirring trouble. I want your perspective before we decide on our next move. Jon stood as well, bowing his head slightly. "As you say, Your Grace. I'll be ready." She rolled her eyes at the formality but did not object. He left her solar, feeling a mix of relief and lingering tension. The realm was never stable for long. It seemed that every time one dispute was settled, another rose in its place. Yet that was ruling an endless series of challenges. They had chosen it, or rather, fate had thrust it upon them. He made his way down the corridors toward the chambers assigned to him. Outside, the sky was fully dark, and the city's lanterns glittered like stars. Passing an open window, he paused to breathe in the night air. He wondered how the next day's negotiations would unfold, who the ambitious lords of the Reach might be, and whether they, too, would try to challenge Daenerys or coax him into supporting some alternate claim. Such ploys were inevitable in a land recovering from chaos. And beyond that, who knew how other regions might stir with similar ambition? Yet amid all the uncertainty, Jon found a sliver of resolve. He was no stranger to the burden of leadership. He would do whatever it took to protect the fragile peace, even if it meant riding into battle again, or standing firm against cunning lords who sought to undermine the crown. Let them come, he thought. So long as Daenerys balanced her might with justice, and so long as he and Tyrion could guide her away from the edge of cruelty, the realm might endure. The dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, were not just instruments of fear, but symbols that House Targaryen had returned to shape a new destiny. He continued to his rooms, shoulders heavy. Though night offered some respite, he knew it would not last. Tomorrow, the dance would begin anew, courtiers, lords, and envoys, each with demands. But in that moment, he remembered the hush of the North's godwood, the memory of Rhaegal's scarred side pressing against him, and the quiet promise he had made to himself to ensure that no throne was worth sacrificing the realm's soul. Daenerys wanted a better world. So did he, if only it were simple. Morning arrived with a rose-hued sunrise. Jon rose early, habit from his night's watch days, and found himself drawn to the courtyard where the dragons often roost. He discovered Drogon curled atop a collapsed portion of wall, dozing. Viserion was perched near a stable tower, wings half-furled, while Rhaegal occupied a wide corner, nibbling on the remains of a large boar. Guards kept a careful distance. Jon approached Rhaegal first, murmuring a greeting. The dragon recognized him with a low growl that wasn't aggression, more a rumbling acknowledgement. He still felt that bond, the intangible link of blood and magic that allowed him to mount Rhaegal and even command Viserion if needed. But as he stroked the dragon's scaled flank, he recalled how close they had come to losing them all during the ambush in the city. He was grateful these creatures yet lived. They were a fearsome force, yes, but also living testaments to House Targaryen's precarious fortunes. Hearing a footstep behind him, Jon turned to see a young guard in the livery of the Red Keep. The man bowed hastily. "Lord Hand, the Queen requests your presence in the council chamber." Jon nodded, following the guard back into the keep. The small council chamber was a large room near the throne room with a long table and high-backed chairs. Tyrion was already there, scanning documents. Missandei, Daenerys' trusted counselor from Essos, was present as well, though she appeared pensive. Grey Worm stood near the door, silent and watchful. Daenerys herself sat at the head of the table wearing a fitted dark gown. As Jon entered, she gestured for him to take a seat. "We have news from the Reach. Tyrion received a raven this morning." Tyrion folded his arms and spoke matter-of-factly. "It seems that certain lords who once backed House Tyrell and then House Tarly are in confusion. The Tyrells are all but extinct, and with Randall Tarly dead, his son Dickon also gone, there's a power vacuum. A handful of lesser lords are jostling for the title of Warden of the South, claiming they have some right to it. This jostling could lead to conflict if not resolved." Daenerys tapped her fingers on the table. "We still hold Highgarden, but I placed a caretaker there, a steward to manage the estates. These lords resent the notion that the crown might pass over local leadership entirely. One of them, a certain Lord Redwine, insists that his house's wealth and legacy entitle him to lead the Reach. Another, the new Lord Rowan, is amassing men around Golden Grove. So far, no open clashes, but it's building." Jon frowned. "Can we not name a new Warden of the South to quell the unrest? Tyrion once suggested giving lands to those who prove loyal." Daenerys nodded. "Precisely. The question is, whom do we trust? Granting too much power to a single lord might invite future rebellion. But if we leave it in chaos, the region might tear itself apart, harming harvests and trade." Tyrion flipped through a few parchments. We could recall what Olenna Tyrell once said, "The lords of the Reach bow to whomever holds Highgarden." If you install a truly loyal subject in Highgarden, the lesser lords might follow suit. But is there anyone with an unblemished claim that the people will accept? The Tarly line was overshadowed by their betrayal, so awarding them the seat would be controversial. The Redwynes hold the Arbor, known for wine, but they might not be popular with inland lords. As for House Hightower of Old Town, their leadership is uncertain. Lord Leighton Hightower is old and his heirs are numerous but untested. Missandei spoke up quietly. We could attempt to create a council that collectively governs the Reach, guided by a crown-appointed overseer. Distributing power might prevent one family from dominating. But then we risk endless bickering. Daenerys let out a sigh. I'd rather avoid a prolonged fiasco. Perhaps we should journey there ourselves, demonstrate that the crown is paying attention, and broker a compromise before the region boils over. Tyrion raised a brow. That's one approach. Another is to summon these contenders to King's Landing and force them to air their claims. Decide who's best suited and quell the rest with the threat of dragons. A show of might dissuade them from further trouble. Jon weighed in. Summoning them here could work, but it might also be seen as humiliating, pulling them from their domain to kneel in your hall. Some might view it as an opportunity to unify in defiance. Traveling to the Reach in person could earn goodwill. Daenerys nodded at Jon's viewpoint, then looked to Tyrion. I'm inclined to handle it directly. The realm must see that I care about their disputes, not only about my seat in the capital. And if we appear in the skies with our dragons, it may calm the lords who think we're ignoring them. Tyrion pursed his lips. Very well. Shall I prepare to accompany you? She glanced at Jon, who gave a small nod. We'll both go, she said. Grey Worm can command enough Unsullied to keep order in King's Landing while we're gone. We'll need a suitable escort, but we won't march an army. No sense turning this into a show of force beyond the dragons themselves. Missandei offered a gentle suggestion. Your Grace, if you bring all 3 dragons, some might see it as overkill. Why not take just Drogon and Rhaegal? Let Viserion remain to help guard the city in your absence. We want to reassure the people in the Reach, not frighten them into open revolt. Daenerys considered that carefully. A fair point. Drogon and Rhaegal will be enough to show we haven't lost our might. Viserion can stay behind. A reminder to any in the city who might plot while we're away. Jon felt a prickle of unease, recalling that the last time the dragons had been separated, Viserion had nearly been gravely wounded. But he nodded, practicalities demanded it. I'll ride Rhaegal. You'll take Drogon. Tyrion rubbed his temples. Another royal progress, then. Let's hope it doesn't end in chaos. The day was spent making preparations for the journey, which would begin on the morrow. Daenerys, Jon, Tyrion, and a selected retinue of loyal soldiers would fly or ride to the Reach, stopping first near Highgarden. There, they would summon the local claimants to present their petitions. After a day or two of negotiation, Daenerys would choose a suitable arrangement. In theory, this would unify the region and quell the threat of a budding civil war. Jon visited Rhaegal that evening, checking his harness and ensuring the dragon had fed sufficiently for the trip. The beast responded with a throaty rumble, apparently eager for another flight. In the distance, Drogon soared around the towers, watchful and imposing. Viserion, perched near the ramparts, let out an occasional roar that reverberated through the keep's courtyards. The city's residents had grown somewhat accustomed to these creatures, yet they still scattered whenever one took flight overhead. That night, Daenerys and Jon conferred briefly about the plan. She seemed cautiously optimistic, hoping that if they could secure the Reach, and with Dorne and the North stable, the realm might finally enjoy a lasting peace. Jon agreed, though he warned that ambition and pride always lurked in powerful houses. Someone would undoubtedly test them again in the future. She accepted that but remained determined to prevent conflict now. At dawn, the retinue assembled in the courtyard. Tyrion, wearing a traveling cloak, mounted a sturdy horse. 50 Unsullied accompanied them as well, along with a handful of knights sworn to Daenerys. The queen wore riding leathers reminiscent of her days in Essos, while Jon donned a mix of Stark practicality and Targaryen red accents. Drogon swooped overhead, landing in a swirl of dust and heat. Jon guided Rhaegal into position beside the bigger dragon, while Tyrion's horse pranced nervously. The plan was for the dragons to fly ahead, with the main party following on horseback. They would meet at predetermined campsites each evening unless urgent matters arose that required the dragon's immediate presence. Once more, Jon felt that strange blend of excitement and fatigue. His life had become a continuous pattern of dealing with one crisis, then hurrying to the next. Drogon took wing in a thunderous leap. Daenerys perched upon his back with regal poise. Rhaegal, not to be outdone, spread his emerald wings and launched upward as well, carrying Jon into the morning sky. The retinue's banners snapped in the breeze below as they began their journey. King's Landing shrank behind them, overshadowed by the rising sun, and soon the farmland beyond the city rolled out like a patchwork quilt of fields, villages, and winding roads. They flew for hours, occasionally circling back to ensure the retinue was on track. By midday, they descended to rest in a clearing near a shallow river, allowing both dragons and riders to take water and food. Tyrion's horse nearly threw him when Drogon landed nearby, but the imp kept his seat with a muttered curse. Daenerys smiled faintly at the spectacle. As they continued south and west, the landscape grew greener and richer, typical of the fertile reach. Orchards dotted the horizon, vast fields of grain swayed in the breeze, and small hamlets bustled with peasants preparing for harvest. From the sky, Jon saw how integral this region was to feeding the rest of Westeros. If a civil war broke out here, famine could spread everywhere. Near sunset, they made camp in a meadow. Tyrion and the soldiers pitched tents, while Daenerys and Jon let Drogon and Rhaegal hunt for large game in the vicinity. Occasionally, a startled cry echoed from somewhere in the woods, a deer or boar meeting its end. The company lit fires and set watches. Over a simple meal of bread and stew, Tyrion laid out the known claimants to leadership in the Reach. Lord Redwine of the Arbor was rumored to have the largest navy in the region, as well as wealth from wine exports. Lord Rowan of Golden Grove had a decent claim through a maternal Tyrell line, though some questioned its validity. A minor Hightower cousin was also said to be pressing for authority, brandishing the Hightower name. Still others, like House B. Barry or House Fossaway, might try lesser claims. Any of these lords might resent the crown's caretaker at Highgarden. They might unify behind a single candidate if they think they can extract concessions from us, Tyrion pointed out. We should be prepared. Daenerys nodded, gazing into the campfire. Perhaps naming one of them as Warden and Guardian of the Reach is simpler than setting up a caretaker, so long as they swear unbreakable oaths of loyalty. The question is, who among them is most trustworthy? Jon sipped his wine and shrugged. Trust might be too strong a word. We want someone who knows that defiance leads nowhere. Someone who can keep the region's lords in line. Tyrion smiled wryly. Precisely. Let's see if any stands out when we meet them. We might hold a council at Highgarden, inviting them all. Then watch how they behave. Daenerys turned her eyes to the horizon where twilight blazed. Let's hope they value peace. I'm weary of war, as we all are. But I'll do what must be done. Night's chill set in. Jon, exhausted, eventually found his way to a tent. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of distant battles, old regrets, and the ephemeral image of the Night King dissolving into shards of ice. He woke before dawn, breath visible in the cold air, and stepped outside to see Rhaegal curled near a smoldering campfire. Daenerys emerged from her own tent not long after, hair slightly tousled, her expression determined. The company struck camp, mounted up, and resumed the journey. By noon, the towers and outer walls of Highgarden rose in the distance, a grand castle perched atop rolling hills of lush farmland and vineyards. Once the seat of House Tyrell, it now displayed Targaryen banners alongside the golden rose of Tyrell. The caretaker, a steward named Morin, had been placed there by the crown to manage daily affairs. As Drogon and Rhaegal approached, the castle gates swung open and the watchers on the walls gaped in awe at the dragon's arrival. Daenerys and Jon landed in the vast courtyard, scattering stable hands and small folk. Tyrion and the soldiers arrived on horseback shortly after. Morin, a balding man in modest garb, rushed forward to bow. Your Grace, my Lord Hand, welcome to Highgarden. Daenerys dismounted gracefully. Jon slid off Rhaegal, patting the dragon's side. Tyrion joined them, dusting off his cloak. Morin led them inside, anxious to show them the state of affairs. The great hall of Highgarden, once famed for its beauty, still held a certain grandeur. Vines and flowers had been carefully arranged and sunlight streamed through high windows. Servants offered refreshments, wine, fruit, fresh bread. Daenerys and Jon exchanged a quick glance, acknowledging that for all the region's turmoil, Highgarden retained its cultivated wealth. Morin prattled on about crops, orchard yields, and how he'd done his best to maintain stability. Then he informed them that messengers had gone out to the local claimants, summoning them to Highgarden. At the Queen's request, They were expected within a day or two. Until then, your grace, the castle is yours, Morin said, bowing again. We'll make certain you and your retinue are comfortably lodged. Daenerys thanked him politely. Once Morin hustled off to oversee arrangements, Tyrion turned to the queen, a pensive look on his face. 2 days, perhaps? Let's see which lords arrive first. That might tell us something about who is eager to court your favor. Jon surveyed the hall. We should also keep an eye on the mood of the small folk nearby. If they resent the caretaker or suspect new taxes, they might be more inclined to side with any rebel lord. Daenerys nodded. Agreed. Let's be cautious. Until the others arrive, we'll remain watchful. Thus, they settled into Highgarden. The dragons roamed the surrounding fields, devouring livestock that Morin procured from local shepherds who were compensated in gold, though many watched with wide eyes as Drogon or Rhaegal swooped down. Daenerys spent part of each day riding Drogon above the farmland, letting peasants see that the crown was present but not aiming to destroy their livelihoods. Jon, meanwhile, took Rhaegal on shorter patrols. Tyrion drank arbor wine and studied genealogies in the castle library, hoping to glean insight into each claimant's background. On the second day, the first lord arrived, Lord Redwine, preceded by a small retinue bearing the grape cluster sigil on their banners. He wore fine clothing, carried himself with confidence, and had a wine cask in tow as a gift for the queen. That same afternoon, Lord Rowan and his men rode in, sporting the sigil of a golden tree. They seemed tense, exchanging wary looks with the Redwines. By evening, a solemn cousin of the Hightower family, Ser Ricard Hightower, arrived with fewer men but an unmistakable sense of entitlement. Others filtered in as well, Lord Fossaway with an apple crest, a beesberry or two, and smaller lords with tenuous claims. Under Daenerys' command, they were all invited to a great feast in Highgarden's hall that night. The tension was palpable as these lords eyed one another, each suspecting the others of coveting the top seat in the Reach. Daenerys sat at the high table with Jon at her right and Tyrion at her left, quietly observing how the lords interacted. Some tried to flatter the queen, boasting of their loyalty, others glared across the table at potential rivals. When the final course was cleared, Daenerys stood, letting silence fall. She spoke in a clear voice, explaining that she had come to hear their proposals for how best to govern the Reach, ensuring stability and prosperity. She made it plain that no open conflict would be tolerated. If any tried to seize power by force, the dragons would intervene. Then she invited them to speak. They erupted in a chorus of claims, a swirl of genealogies, half-truths, and bravado. Lord Redwine boasted of controlling the arbor which produced the wine that made the Reach wealthy. He insisted the region needed a strong economy and that he was best suited to lead. Lord Rowan retorted that he alone had Tyrell blood through his grandmother, making him the rightful heir to Highgarden's seat. Ser Ricard Hightower insisted that Old Town was the oldest and largest city in the Reach, and that historically the Hightowers had been paramount in the region before the Tyrells rose. The smaller lords piped up with lesser arguments, hoping to curry favor. Tyrion tried to moderate, but the meeting ran long, eventually devolving into bickering. Daenerys finally called an end to the feast, instructing them to prepare formal petitions by the next day. The lords dispersed in ill humor. Jon saw the weight pressing on Daenerys. He remembered how she'd faced Yara Greyjoy in King's Landing and realized that might have been simpler compared to this labyrinth of competing claims. The next day, the real negotiations began, with Tyrion orchestrating one-on-one meetings between Daenerys and each lord. Jon sat in on these, occasionally offering a neutral viewpoint or reminding them that she sought the good of all, not just a single house. The lords attempted bribes, flattery, appeals to tradition, or dire warnings about the rivals' ambition. Tyrion scribbled notes. Daenerys listened calmly, occasionally asking pointed questions about how they would manage taxes, local disputes, or the distribution of grain. She tested their competence as well as their loyalty. Late that evening, after the final meeting, Daenerys paced a small solar with Jon and Tyrion. They're also fixated on gaining the seat, she said, voice tight. None truly speak for the people. They just want status. Tyrion exhaled. It's how great lords have always been, I'm afraid. But at least we can glean which ones might keep the peace. Jon tapped a finger on the table. Lord Rowan seems earnest about the Tyrell legacy, but he has fewer men. Lord Redwine has wealth and a fleet, but he's clearly arrogant. The Hightower cousin is well-connected but doesn't seem particularly adept at managing anything beyond Old Town's affairs. Perhaps we could combine them. Rowan in Highgarden, Redwine retains control of the arbor but is named an advisor. The Hightowers remain custodians of Old Town in the crown's name. That might spread out power. Daenerys considered. So no single warden? Or a warden of the South that is largely a symbolic title with actual power shared among them? Tyrion shrugged. It might stave off rebellion, but we risk them quarreling among themselves constantly. She paced again, then halted at the window, gazing out at the moonlit fields. Perhaps that's better than risking one rising to challenge the crown in a decade. If they're balanced against each other, none can stand alone against me. Jon sighed. Is that the realm we want, kept in balance by internal rivalries? She looked back at him, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. It may be the realm we must accept, at least for now, until trust and stability grow. Tyrion cleared his throat. We'll finalize a plan in the morning. For now, let's get some rest. The lords will gather again tomorrow, expecting a decision. They parted ways. Jon found himself wandering the corridors of Highgarden, which still bore Tyrell tapestries depicting golden roses, lush gardens, and scenes of chivalry. A pang of nostalgia rose in him. He recalled Sansa once praising the Reach's beauty, how she dreamed of courtly life before the wars battered all illusions. Now, this castle was a testament to a once powerful house laid low. Such was the cycle of power in Westeros. Next morning, the negotiations resumed. Daenerys presented the outline of a compromise. No single family would hold absolute rule over the entire Reach. Rather, the old seat of Highgarden would be held by Lord Rowan, owing to his tenuous Tyrell blood and moderate disposition. The Arbor would remain the exclusive domain of House Redwyne, with preferential shipping agreements. The Hightowers would oversee Old Town as they always had, but with oversight from the Crown regarding any major policy shifts, particularly where the Citadel was concerned. All would pay taxes to the Crown proportionate to their lands. The Crown would name a Warden of the South for purely military defense purposes if an external threat arose, but that position would rotate among them with the Queen's approval. It was a complex arrangement, yet it prevented any single lord from feeling entirely sidelined. Redwyne sneered about losing out on Highgarden, Rowan bristled at the mention of rotating the Warden title, and Hightower grumbled about external oversight. But Daenerys held firm, reminding them that if they refused, she could place her own garrison in Highgarden and name a crown steward. The presence of 2 dragons waiting outside the castle underscored her words. One by one, they grudgingly agreed to the terms, some more resentfully than others. Tyrion drew up the official documents, while Jon watched the tension spool out like a taut rope that had been partially loosened. Some lords might resent the arrangement, but none seemed eager to face Dragonfire. They signed. Daenerys accepted their oaths and assured them that as queen, she sought the prosperity of all in the Reach. Only time would tell how sincere that vow rang to their ears. By the following day, it was done. A new era for the Reach, albeit an uncertain one. Daenerys lingered one more night, receiving small gifts of produce and wine from local notables eager to placate the crown. In private, she confided to Jon that though she disliked the complexity of the arrangement, it might keep the peace long enough for a new generation to adapt to Targaryen rule without launching fresh rebellions. Jon conceded it was likely the best outcome they could manage in a fractured land.